Our story begins with the soliloquy of our protagonist, who asks himself, who could have ever imagined this? He reflects on his mundane life, falling asleep after work, drinking a beer, and playing a game like always. But in a shocking twist, he awoke not in his room, but transported directly into the fantasy world of the very game he was playing. In that world, one of his companions urgently warns him that they are being swarmed by a new wave of stronger demons, to which he coolly replies that he will take care of them and leaps into the fray. And wreathed in a powerful aura, he dives directly into a chasm teeming with monsters. He winds up his axe to attack the stunned giant, and moving at a lightning-fast speed. With a single devastating downward slash, he cleaves the towering giant clean in two. The giant screams in agony as his body cuts into half and blood gushes around everywhere, and the ground is littered with its bisected remains. After slaying the monster in a brutal, violent frenzy, he stands alone amid the swirling smoke and wreckage, the undeniable victor. He catches his breath, his powerful physique evident as he surveys the destruction he has wrought, and notes the difficulty, commenting that facing high-level demons right from the start is just what you'd expect from the demon realm. He grimly realizes the path to the great demon will be even tougher than he thought. But despite the daunting road ahead, he has a more pressing concern. He braces himself, knowing he's about to get an earful for his reckless solo charge as he sees the destructive fireballs coming towards monsters from the edge of mountains. Just then, a massive fire explosion erupts before him as the fireballs strike. As predicted, a furious voice screams his name from across the battlefield. The mage, Melissa, appears with her hands on her hips, angrily scolding him for rushing in alone again. But then another party member calls out to her, his hands already on his sword, ready to draw it from its sheath. He's the hero, Gale, who stands alert, aware of monsters attacking from behind. And expertly wielding his sword, he cuts down the enemies. And then advises her to save the scolding for after the fight, reminding her that the monsters come first. To which she grumbles to herself, finding Gale's by-the-book heroics frustrating. Next to them, their priestess prays for their success, asking for the fighting spirit of Atala to be with them. As she worries aloud that Kadim is pushing himself too hard for their sake and should take better care of himself, a hidden monster lunges at her from behind. But it is quickly intercepted and neutralized by one of her companions. The priest, Gordon, appears, calmly reassuring her not to worry, and suggests that Kadim must have his reasons, to which Cyril admits she's probably overthinking it. The two healers then agree to focus on the monsters first and discuss the matter with him later. And with the entire party now engaged, they work together to systematically wipe out the remaining demons. The protagonist introduces his team, himself, Kadim, the vanguard, the hero, Gale, the priestess, Cyril, the priest, Gordon, and the mage, Melissa. A party formed to defeat the great demon, and reveals his in-game title, the Great Warrior of Atala, the god of struggle and the wilderness. However, he clarifies that there is another, more crucial part to his identity. A reflection in his eye reveals his true self, a modern office worker. He is a transmigrator, trapped in the game, and explains that the game's main story was simple, set within a hellish demon world. The objective was clear. A hero, guided by divine revelation, gathers companions to slay the great demon. And while some players might enjoy an adventure filled with fighting grotesque monsters, for an ordinary person from the modern world unaccustomed to such violence, the reality of this world is an unbearable nightmare. To survive and fight, Kadim is forced to drink the blood of demons. He laments that for someone like him, this world is far too harsh. A system window explains his unique trait, Blood Berserker, which grants a temporary buff after drinking a demon's blood. Fueled by the desperate hope of escape, he slaughters demons with a singular thought, if he can just kill them all, so he can finally leave this accursed world. Losing himself to the carnage, he screams his desire again and again. And the drive to escape as fast as possible is his only motivation, pushing him to kill faster and faster. He stands transformed atop a mountain of demon corpses, a monster born from desperation. In his berserk state, his humanity is completely lost. Seeing an opening, a formidable winged demoness charges toward the frenzied Kadim. She lunges, fangs bared, ready to strike him down, but he grabs her from neck and calls her a damn demon. Vowing to devour every last one of them, his face twists into a terrifying demonic grin as he is completely lost to his berserker rage, and roars that he'll drink every last drop of her blood. Just as he's about to strike the killing blow, his comrades desperately call out his name and beg him to snap out of it. In that moment, the horrifying truth hits him, and the full scene reveals him clutching Melissa by the neck, ready to crush the life out of her, and she can only manage a faint whisper of his name before her strength fades. As his sanity returns, he instantly releases her, and looks on in horror unable to believe he has just attacked one of his own. The terrible side effect of his blood berserker trait becomes clear. The demonic energy causes him to gradually lose his mind. He's horrified to realize his madness has progressed so far that he can no longer recognize his friends. And a simple line of game text has become a horrifying, mind-shattering reality. Also, the demonic blood he once found disgusting now tastes sweet. And he feels a surging bloodlust constantly gnawing at his sanity, making it ever harder to control his violent outbursts. Questioning if he can remain sane long enough to defeat the great demon, he wonders what will happen if he loses control completely. And as a singular, overwhelming urge to kill everything floods his mind, threatening to take over, Melissa holds him from behind, calling his name to snap him back to reality. Despite her injuries, she reassures him that she is fine, telling him not to blame himself, and declares that since he had always protected them, it was now their turn to protect him from his own madness, but he desperately keeps on apologizing to her. But then the party's healers, Cyril and Gordon, approach to offer their support, and promise him that they would do everything in their power to help him fight the madness and protect him until the very end. Gordon adds with a supportive smile that if all else failed, he wasn't afraid to beat some sense back into him. Just then their leader, Gale, approaches them, asking if they were all rested and ready, and announces that it was time to move out. With that, he extends a hand to Kadim, reaffirming their shared mission to defeat the great demon and save the world together. Supported by Melissa, our guy looks at the hero's hand and accepts his gestures. Together, their minds and bodies battered but their resolve firm, the party pushes onward. At long last, they reach the final boss. Gale cries out for Kadim to deliver the final blow, so our guy channels all his power, raising his axe, and finishes him off, sending the great demon's head soaring through the air. Gale watches with relief and exhaustion, whispering, "They finally did it," as the headless body of the great demon begins to tremble and fall on the ground. Melissa wonders aloud if their long, arduous journey is truly over. So Gordon confirms their victory, stating that it is finally over. As her eyes widen with dawning realization and relief, something grabs her attention, and a beam of light suddenly pierces the sky. Startled by the sudden change, Cyril collapses, asking what's happening, and frantically calls out, asking where Kadim has gone. On the other side, he just leaves his axe behind and rushes toward the light. Gale screams for him to stop, warning him not to rush into the light, to which our guy pauses at the last point, turning for one last look at his companions, and gives them a small, knowing look, ready to say his final goodbye. With a faint smile, he tells his comrades it was an honor to be with them in person, not just watching from behind a screen. Bidding a silent farewell, he turns and walks into the light, believing it is his way home. However, Gale reaches out desperately, shouting for him not to leave. But it's too late. He is completely engulfed by the light, and Gale's hand can only grasp at the fading light as his friend disappears. The light vanishes, leaving the rest of the party in the bleak demon realm. Cyril slumps to the ground, overcome with grief and despair. Heartbroken, she whispers his name one last time into the empty wasteland. In the next scene, our guy finds himself walking through a dark void. He recognizes this darkness from when he first arrived and muses that the first thing he'll do back home is grab a cold beer, and vows to never play a medieval fantasy game again, though he admits it bothers him that he couldn't say a proper goodbye. He forces himself to accept the harsh reality that he will never see his comrades again, and with a sense of finality, he declares that Kadim, the great warrior of Atala, is gone forever. Ahead, he spots a glowing line of light which he believes is the exit back to reality. He thinks he'll finally be free once he passes through, but a sudden realization makes him hesitate. Sweating and trembling, he tries to deny it, praying that what's happening is just a dream. But his denial shatters, replaced by a wave of manic, despair-filled laughter. He lets out a primal scream of pure anguish as his worst nightmare is confirmed. A system message flashes before his eyes, sealing his fate and heralding the start of a new game. With that, the game begins to restart, and his torment is about to begin all over again. In the next scene, a holy knight of Elga leads a procession of guards and prisoners down a dirt road. The prisoners, including a powerfully built barbarian, are bound in heavy iron shackles. The procession marches onward, a cart trailing behind them filled with confiscated goods or supplies. Just then, fellow prisoners loudly begin to proclaim their innocence, blaming each other for their crimes. Fed up with the noise, a guard yells at them to be quiet. Hence, they fall silent under his glare, one of them clicking his tongue in annoyance. He mutters to himself about how much he hates listening to the trash run their mouths. Suddenly, a merchant among the prisoners calls out to him, insisting he has been wronged. The guard turns to the nervous merchant and asks what he wants. The man desperately pleads his case, claiming he was framed when someone planted demonic byproducts in his bag. The guard listens to his plea with a stony, unimpressed expression. He knows that sometimes the innocent are framed just to pad someone's achievements. Yet he internally scoffs at the young holy knight in charge, knowing he cannot defy him. Fearing for his own life, he grits his teeth in anger at the merchant, and strides towards him, his anger blazing, demanding how he dares to question a holy knight of Elga. He dismisses the terrified merchant, telling him to return to his spot and that he will be released if he is truly innocent. Dejected, the man shuffles back into line under the guard's watchful eye. The guard grimly thinks that with a holy knight involved, the merchant is unlikely to survive, and his attention then shifts from the merchant to a more imposing figure. Standing silently among the prisoners is the powerfully built barbarian, also in chains, which makes the guard wonder how they even managed to capture such a formidable man. Kadim, inhabiting the body of the barbarian, walks silently, trying to make sense of his situation. Utterly bewildered, he wonders what in the world is going on. Even though he recognizes his familiar body, but all the power he had painstakingly built up has vanished. But on the bright side, the crushing madness and guilt that once plagued his mind are also gone as he recalls the moments his berserker rage caused him to harm his own comrades. Recalling the new gain message, he deduces that he has simply started over. Yet, he remains confused. This new beginning feels completely different from how the game originally started. The story never started this way. As he ponders this, an old man calls out to him. Just then, an elderly prisoner offers him something to chew on, hoping to make the walk less boring. Kadim looks at the old man, surprised by the unexpected kindness. The old man explains that he was once held by barbarians, and that he reminds him of them. Our guy accepts the dried root in his shackled hands, and the old man asks how he got caught, but with no memory of it, he can only reply that he does not know. The old man simply accepts his answer with a quiet, "I see," and remarks that the Empire's holy knights are too hostile toward heretics, believing worshipping a different god is not a sin. Our guy asks if there is another empire on the continent. The old man, shocked, wonders if he truly doesn't know about the Lucanian Empire. Kadim is confused, remembering Lucanian as a kingdom, not an empire. The old man tells him that was a long time ago. This new information makes him wonder if he is in a parallel world with a different history and questions where they are being taken, and the old man speculates they're heading to the Empire's holy capital, Lucaon. The old man explains that upon arrival they will be judged, but as a heretic, he will face the dreaded Inquisition. Our guy feels a sliver of relief, thinking that at least they will not kill him right away. But the old man is horrified by his calm reaction, exclaiming that there is nothing to be relieved about. He frantically warns that the Inquisitors are sadists who will treat a heretic like a new toy. He graphically describes the tortures that await, nails driven into his gums and molten iron poured into his nostrils. As he speaks, the holy knight on horseback suddenly strikes him down with his spear, and ends his life then and there, and declares that anyone who insults a knight of Elga must wash away their sins with death. With a smug look, he implies there is more punishment to come, and his horse steps forward, carrying him toward his next target. He confronts Kadim, asking if he was the one who caused the commotion, and demands that the barbarian bow his head and beg for forgiveness if he does not want to end up like the old man. With a smirk, he adds that he might let him live if he begs. In response, a defiant, mocking grin spreads across Kadim's face, which makes the holy knight's face twist in rage, furious that a mere heretic dares to mock him. Shouting, "This is blasphemy," the knight charges, his spear glowing with holy power. But our guy remains completely unfazed, his smirk never wavering as the glowing spear tip approaches his eye. The knight is momentarily stunned by his lack of fear. In a stunning display of strength, he catches the spearhead between his cuffed hands, stopping the charge cold. The knight grunts in disbelief, struggling to push his weapon forward. Sweating and gritting his teeth, he furiously screams for him to let go. "Well, if you insist," Kadim replies coolly before releasing the spear. The force of the push sends the knight and his horse stumbling backward. Enraged and humiliated, he vows to pass judgment upon the damned heretical bastard. But his eyes widen in a mix of fury and disbelief, as our guy leaps into the air to tackle him. The attack smashes the knight and his horse to the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust. Kadim watches as the knight lies on the ground before him, and stands silently, assessing the aftermath. The knight struggles to his feet, cursing the filthy heretical bastard for his audacity. He picks up his spear, enraged that the barbarian dared to harm a holy knight. As our guy notes that even for a rookie, a holy knight is durable enough to survive an attack like that. The holy knight raises his spear to the sky, preparing to unleash a powerful divine skill. Kadim watches grimly, recognizing the incoming attack as dangerous. The holy knight begins his prayer, calling out to Elga, the master of eternal light. And a pillar of light descends from the heavens as he asks for the power to strike down the minion of demons. "In Elga's name I shall pass judgment upon you, heretic," he declares with fanatical fury, and swings his spear, channeling the divine energy into a powerful forward strike. As he rushes toward him, who braces himself near the prisoner cart, Kadim raises his arms to defend himself, recognizing the sheer power of the attack. He realizes that in his current, powerless state, he cannot possibly dodge this, and the divine judgment barrels toward him in a blinding flash of light. The attack lands, shattering his chains and flinging him onto the cart with devastating force. After the dust settles to reveal a long gouge in the earth, with the knight at one end and the barbarian amidst the wreckage at the other, Kadim clutches his chest, a faint blue light glowing over the wound. He has somehow survived the direct hit. The knight approaches, shocked that the barbarian survived his attack. He smirks condescendingly, remarking that the barbarian's durability is as brutish as his appearance. Our guy reflects on his weakness. Even with his unique blood berserker trait, his reset abilities make struggling against a mere rookie this difficult, and thinks that if a low-level demon were present, he would not be having this much trouble. Desperately, he scans his surroundings, searching for a way out of this dire situation. And amidst the debris of the cart, he suddenly catches a familiar, pungent smell. The knight strides toward him and declares, "Barbarian, I acknowledge your strength, but this is as far as you go," and smugly tells him to receive forgiveness through death. But his eyes suddenly widen in shock as a foul odor hits him. Covering his nose, he recoils and exclaims, "Ugh, what is that smell?" Seeing the knight's reaction, a slow, sinister laugh escapes the hour guy's lips. His laughter grows louder, baffling the knight, who asks if he has gone insane before his death. With a chilling smile, he mocks him, saying that Elga seems to have chosen him, not the rookie knight. He slams his fist into a broken crate, revealing the source of the stench, and pulls out a severed, bloodied goblin head by its greasy hair. The knight gags at the sight and smell of the grotesque trophy. On Kadim's chest, the wound from the holy attack glows, forming a distinct cross-shaped sigil. With his eyes shadowed by a confident smirk, he has clearly turned the tables. Clutching the key to his survival, he presents the goblin's head, ready to reveal his unique power. Holding up the severed goblin head, he begins to drink the demon's blood to absorb its power. The Holy Knight of Elga and his soldiers watch in stunned silence as he performs this vile act. Disgusted, he wonders if he has gone mad and decides the barbarian is too filthy to approach. So he orders a terrified foot soldier to go and finish off the filthy bastard. As the soldier approaches, Kadim's body begins to glow with a menacing red aura as the demon's blood takes effect. The soldier trembles with fear, stammering out a command to die. Mustering his courage, he screams and charges at the now buffed Kadim. But before the spear can land, his hand lashes out, grabbing the soldier's face. As our guy calmly wipes his mouth while still holding the goblin's head, the soldier keeps stammering and can barely ask to be spared. But Kadim ignores his pleas, tightening his grip. And with a final squeeze, his grip distorts the soldier's face beyond recognition. The Holy Knight watches the gruesome display in utter shock and disbelief. Kadim finishes the job with a brutal crush of the man's face, noting that the lesser demon's blood only granted a basic strength enhancement. Despite the limited power-up, he knows it's enough to escape. Roaring with rage, he declares that this strength is more than enough for his purposes, and lets out a primal scream as the berserker energy fully envelops him. The remaining soldiers look on in sheer terror. One of them stammers in fear, realizing he's not facing a man, but a monster. He screams that it's a monster as panic begins to set in among the ranks. Terrified, they drop their spears and begin to scatter. Furious, the Holy Knight screams at his men not to retreat, reminding them that their target is unarmed and wounded. He threatens severe punishment under military law for anyone who dares to flee. He believes they can still win, convinced a few more spear stabs will be enough to kill him. But suddenly, Kadim hurls the goblin's head, forcing him to dodge. He stumbles back and falls on the ground, momentarily thrown off balance by the grotesque projectile. He looks over at the landed demon head, wondering what just happened, but he realizes too late that the head was just a distraction. Using the opening, Kadim closes the distance with terrifying speed. The Holy Knight quickly recovers, taking a defensive stance. He calls for strength to allow him, as Elga's agent, to cut down the treacherous demon's servant. And his eyes begin to glow with holy power as he prepares to unleash his ultimate attack. So he charges forward, spear leveled, enveloped in a blinding golden aura, and with a battle cry for Elga, he thrusts his holy weapon at Kadim. The holy light explodes on impact, engulfing him completely. Believing he has won, the knight gloats that this is the end for the barbarian, telling him to beg for forgiveness in the next life. But a voice emerges from the light, taunting the greenhorn and asking if this is all he's got. The Holy Knight gasps in disbelief, realizing his powerful attack has failed. Kadim had dodged the attack by gripping the spear with his elbow and side chest. With his other hand, he draws back a glowing red fist and lands a devastating punch that sends the Holy Knight flying backward. The impact sends him crashing back down to earth. And before he can recover, Kadim begins to deliver a merciless beating. As the brutal pummeling continues, the knight weakly begs him to stop. Beaten to a bloody pulp, he admits he was wrong and pleads for forgiveness. Our guy finally stops his assault, looming over the defeated knight who continues to beg. Thinking he has been spared, the knight thanks Kadim as he turns to walk away. But the moment his back is turned, he curses him as ignorant barbarian scum and vows to get his revenge. He lies on the ground, plotting his vengeance in Elga's name, but his vengeful thoughts are cut short when he realizes the barbarian has returned. A spear blade drags a line in the dirt, heading straight for him. He approaches, dragging the knight's own spear behind him. The knight's eyes widen in terror as his shadow falls over him. He lets out a pathetic cry, staring up at his impending doom. He stands over the terrified knight, ready to deliver the final blow. As the knight begs him to wait, he sarcastically prays that the man might be with his damned fake god in the afterlife. With a final insult, he calls the knight a peckless whelp of Elga, and impales the holy knight with his own spear, ending him for good. With the knight dealt with, he calmly surveys the scene, and his eyes lock onto the guards fleeing in the distance. As they scramble to get away from him, he recalls a grim lesson learned from his first playthrough. The fleeing soldiers desperately try to escape, panting for air. One of them looks back over his shoulder in a panic. Believing he's run far enough to be safe, his relief is cut short by a spear through his head. In a swift and brutal sequence, Kadim hunts down and kills the fleeing soldiers one by one. He had learned his lesson well, leave no loose ends. From the bushes, one surviving soldier watches in terror as Kadim stands over the massacre, and the other is bowing his head on the ground in terror. He hides, trembling and hoping he won't be found. But Kadim turns his head, his gaze locking directly onto his hiding spot. With deadly precision, he hurls a spear toward the bushes. The spear flies through the air, finding its mark. The soldier meets his end as the spear pierces his neck, turning his refuge into a grave. He turns as another voice calls out to him. A group of the remaining prisoners approaches, their spokesman praising him for killing the Holy Knight. The man asks Kadim to remove his cuffs so they can talk, but our guy answers with a fatal punch and crushes his head. The other prisoners stare in horror, splattered with the blood of their former companion. He recalls the harsh lesson from his first playthrough once more, and as the horrified prisoners begin to back away from the monstrous barbarian, he leaps into the air, stating the #1 rule he learned the hard way: never leave any loose ends. Preparing to slaughter the remaining witnesses without mercy. A prisoner begs for his life, desperately asking Kadim why he is doing this and what they have done wrong. Ignoring the man's pleas, he stands over him, ready to strike. There can be no witnesses. With cold indifference, he silences the prisoner's final cry for help. He stands silently amidst the carnage, his grim task of eliminating all witnesses nearly complete. The battlefield falls silent. He is the lone survivor, standing over the bodies of the slaughtered soldiers and prisoners. He rationalizes the massacre. If any prisoners had lived, they would have reported him to the Holy Knights. Leaving witnesses alive is a risk he cannot afford to take. Hiding in the bushes, the last remaining prisoner gasps in terror. The terrified man trembles, hoping the barbarian will not find him. Kadim's hunt is nearly over as he approaches the final survivor, the last one. He towers over the last prisoner, preparing to finish the job. With a bloody spear in hand, he looks down on his final victim, ready to finish his job. In a futile act of defiance, the prisoner cries that this is unfair. He breaks down, pleading for his life and insisting he has done nothing wrong. Unmoved, Kadim coldly demands a reason he should be spared. The prisoner makes a desperate appeal, explaining that he was framed and has a wife and child waiting for him. He concedes the man's innocence, but states it is not enough to save him, telling him to just die. As a last resort, the terrified man screams out the one thing that might save his life: a guide. He quickly offers his services, asking the warrior if he needs a guide. The offer gives him pause as he considers the possibility. The man introduces himself as a traveling merchant from Molden, an expert on the terrain. Kadim agrees to question him. His first question reveals a discrepancy in his memory. He asks when the Lucanian kingdom became an empire. The merchant is utterly baffled by the strange question. He theorizes that the barbarian must be from beyond the mountains, isolated for centuries. Getting impatient, Kadim presses the merchant for an answer. The merchant explains that it has been 248 years since the founding of the Lucanian Empire. He pushes further, asking for the year according to the old calendar. After some thought, the merchant estimates the year by the old calendar would be around 1130. The horrifying truth begins to dawn on Kadim. The calendar he knows is now ancient history. He rapidly questions the merchant about the state of the continent, the Elga faith, and the demon realm. The merchant explains that the continent, once unified by Lacanian 300 years ago, is now divided into three powers. He continues, stating the Elga faith grew in power and the demon realm is now a place of no return, confirming that no one who has entered it has ever come back alive. Kadim is stunned. This directly contradicts his own experience of conquering the demon realm. He lists the names of his legendary comrades, Gale, Melissa, Gordon, and Cyril. Desperate for a connection to his past, he asks the merchant if he recognizes the names. The merchant nervously replies that he has never heard of them. However, the name Melissa suddenly sparks a faint glimmer of recognition. He listens intently, a sliver of hope in his eyes as the merchant says he feels like he has heard that name somewhere. The man struggles to place the name, thinking it might be similar to Elisa. Kadim reels from the revelation. The heroes who saved the world have been completely forgotten, and he questions the very nature of his reality. The full weight of his temporal displacement crashes down on him. When he asks why demons are now rampant, the merchant admits that no one knows for sure. The man offers a few common theories, the first being that it is divine punishment from the god Elga. Other theories include a mad archmage opening a gate to another world, or the coming of a great evil. Ultimately, he concludes that the truth is known only to God. He stands speechless, processing the fact that he has been thrown 300 years into the future. Overwhelmed by this new reality, he moves to assess the situation, startling the merchant. Gazing at a world that is no longer his, he concludes that he is indeed on the same continent, but about 300 years after his first playthrough. He reflects on his cruel fate, kicked out of his homeworld and now a stranger in the land he fought to save. The faces of his comrades flash in his mind, friends he parted with not so long ago. He faces the heartbreaking reality that all his friends are now just dust in this new era. The thought of having to repeat the endless cycle of slaughter fills him with utter despair, and he questions the very point of living on, only to endure the same madness and drink disgusting demon blood. With no guarantee of ever returning to his reality, the futility of his situation becomes unbearable. He fears an endless loop of new game scenarios, a hell with no escape. Having lost all hope, he makes a grim decision. He snaps his spear in two, creating a makeshift stake. The merchant watches in confused horror, unsure of what the barbarian is planning. Kadim poises the sharp, broken spear towards his neck, ready to end his suffering. As the terrified merchant asks what he is doing, he resolves to end his journey here, thinking if he starts again, countless lingering attachments will remain. He decides that now is the best time to meet his end. With grim determination, he begins to push the spear into his neck. In his final moments, he hopes that whatever comes next is not just a game over screen. Just as the spear is about to deliver the fatal blow, a memory surfaces. He recalls being asked what he would do after the demon lord was defeated. The memory is of his friend Melissa, musing about perhaps teaching other mages. Her voice echoes in his mind, talking about her dream of building a tower of some kind. The memory of her dream ignites a spark of new purpose within him, and his eyes fly open. He turns to the merchant, demanding to know what he remembers about the name Melissa. The merchant recalls that the first master of the legendary mage tower was said to have a similar name. Kadim immediately asks for the tower's location. The merchant reveals it is in the city of Vestana. The man calculates the distance, informing him that the journey will take at least 2 months. He processes this revelation, his despair replaced by a newfound resolve. A faint, grim smile appears on his face. He thinks to himself that his old comrade will not even let him die in peace. With a new goal, Kadim orders the merchant to guide him to the mage tower, ignoring his protests about his family. The merchant insists that he cannot afford to waste time being a guide. To ensure his compliance, Kadim grabs the man's shoulder and offers him a special payment. The terrifying payment for his services, the barbarian declares, is his life. The threat hangs in the air as he plants his broken spear in the ground. Kadim spares the merchant's life, instead ordering him to get his manacles off and prepare to leave immediately, to which the man replies, "Yes, sir, I understand." While the merchant gathers supplies, our guy finds a simple sword among the wreckage. He deems the sword serviceable for now, planning to forge it into something better using his unique abilities. While the Holy Knight's blessed spear is tempting, he knows such a consecrated weapon would reject him. He wistfully wishes he still had the powerful axe he wielded in his first playthrough. Freed and packed for the journey, the merchant sighs in relief at being alive but cautiously watches his new master. He looks on in disgust and fear as the barbarian fills a waterskin with black blood from a goblin's head. With a new sword and a supply of blood, he is now ready for the long journey ahead. He declares it is time to leave, the reluctant merchant standing nervously behind him. Their epic journey to the mage tower begins. The unlikely pair sets off, leaving the field of slaughter behind them. Days later at the massacre site, crows circle over the decaying remains of the Holy Knight's retinue. The scavengers pick at the bodies, a grim testament to his brutality. A new Holy Knight arrives on the scene, identifying the corpse of her fallen comrade, Linton. Her subordinate, Eden, reports that everyone, soldier and prisoner alike, has been massacred and awaits her orders. He addresses his superior by name, Lady Helia. Helia, a formidable Holy Knight commander, surveys the scene with a cold expression. She orders Eden to search for clues, stating they cannot simply report back to the Archbishop that Linton is dead without answers. As Eden leaves to carry out her command, Helia internally scoffs at the fallen knight, calling him an idiot. Looking down at the corpse, she seethes, wondering who dared to kill a Holy Knight connected to the Archbishop. Her eyes burn with fury as she contemplates the identity of the killers and makes a solemn vow: whoever is responsible for this massacre will pay the price. Under the watchful eye of a full moon, the journey through the wilderness continues. While Kadim sleeps soundly by the dying campfire, his terrified guide Duncan sees a chance for freedom. As the embers fade, the merchant puts his desperate plan into motion. Seeing his companion completely unconscious, he silently gathers his things for a quick getaway. In his haste, however, he leaves behind his main pack, grabbing only what he can carry. Then, he bolts into the dark woods, pushing himself to run as fast as his legs will take him. Fueled by sheer terror, he puts as much distance as he can between himself and his monstrous captor. Believing he's finally escaped, Duncan gasps for air, certain he has gotten away. His only thought is to get as far away as possible from the man who haunts his waking moments. He recalls that getting a traveling companion had initially seemed like a good idea for protection. The problem, he laments, is that his companion is a blood-drinking, murderous barbarian who slaughters people by the dozen. He flashes back to his harrowing experiences over the last few days. His attempts to be friendly, like offering jerky and potatoes, were met with unnerving silence. Even offering the barbarian a warm pelt to lie on by the fire earned him no response. His efforts to make small talk were quickly shut down, leaving him in a state of constant anxiety. He reflects that his companion barely speaks and allows no unnecessary questions, making him completely unreadable. The merchant sees him not as a person, but as a wild beast, making every day feel like a dangerous circus act. But he knows the terrifying silence isn't even the worst part of their journey. The real problem is something far more physically demanding and soul-crushing. It was Kadim's constant, blunt judgment whenever he fell behind. "You're slow." He despairs over the barbarian's ridiculous marching speed, which pushes him, a seasoned merchant, to his breaking point. The moment Duncan would point out the direction, Kadim was already far ahead, leaving him to desperately chase after him. Once he finally caught up, the barbarian would say a single word before taking off again, and while the merchant caught his breath, his companion would glare at him with intimidating impatience. It was a menacing look that felt like a threat to bash his skull in if he was too slow. On the verge of a nervous breakdown, Duncan wondered if his companion's legs were made of steel. The grueling pace had pushed him so far that he genuinely felt like he was going to die. This constant torture is what drove him to the conclusion that he had to escape. And so, seeing his chance while the barbarian slept, he made his desperate dash for freedom. He reasons that now that he's out of the dark forest, his pursuer won't be able to track him. Overwhelmed with emotion, he begins to sob with relief, believing he is finally safe. His celebration is cut short, however, when he remembers his bag. His entire fortune was left behind at the camp. He agonizes over the decision, knowing that going back to retrieve it could wake the sleeping beast. Deciding his life is more precious than his belongings, he turns his back on his fortune. Exhausted and lost, he pauses, hoping it will take the barbarian a while to figure out where he went. Just as he declares himself free, a calm voice cuts through the night, asking where he's going in such a hurry. A jolt of pure terror shoots through Duncan as he recognizes the voice. Stunned into disbelief, he slowly turns, unable to comprehend how this is possible. Kadim stands before him and calmly asks, "Are you running away?" With a piercing stare, he reminds the merchant of the promised payment he has yet to receive for his guidance. Shaking with fear, Duncan is at a complete loss for words. He immediately drops to his knees, proclaiming that he has committed a crime worthy of death and was wrong to forget his companion's mercy. Bowing his head to the ground, he pleads for forgiveness. Kadim leans over him, stating that he doesn't want an apology, but a reason. Otherwise, Duncan will just try to run again. He looks the merchant dead in the eye and demands to know why he fled. Stammering, Duncan confesses that Kadim's pace is just too fast for him to keep up. He admits his fear that if he continued at that speed, he would simply collapse and die. Having admitted his weakness, he resigns himself to his fate, certain he is now a dead man. Kadim silently considers the merchant's terrified explanation. To Duncan's surprise, he simply tells him to get up and return to camp. In an even more shocking turn, he promises that from now on, he will walk a little slower. With the matter settled, Kadim turns and heads back, leaving a bewildered Duncan in his wake. The merchant is left utterly confused by this unexpected show of mercy. Back at the camp, a warm fire is once again burning brightly. An understanding having been reached, Duncan sleeps by the fire while Kadim stands watch. The merchant tosses and turns, muttering in his sleep as he relives the terror of his failed escape. Kadim observes him silently, lost in his own thoughts. He reflects that his hurried pace is a deeply ingrained habit from his first playthrough, where constant urgency was a necessity for survival. He recalls the demon realm, a barren and hostile place where food, water, and rest were unimaginable luxuries. Always on the edge of madness from drinking demon blood, he and his comrades had to push onward relentlessly, even sacrificing sleep. Letting out a breath, he acknowledges that his current surroundings are nowhere near as dangerous. With plenty of resources available, he realizes that while the madness might return someday, for now, it's not a problem. He concedes that he has a reason to slow down, as the merchant has proven to be a very useful guide. At a much more manageable pace, Duncan advises taking a detour to a less guarded border crossing. He is taken aback when his usually uncompromising companion seems to consider the suggestion. Much to Duncan's relief, Kadim simply agrees to the alternate route. He knows he needs a competent guide, as his own mental map of the continent is 300 years out of date. The merchant explains that because holy knights relentlessly hunt demons and heretics, a barbarian like him won't be safe until they reach the Free Cities Alliance. Kadim muses that the holy knight's zealousness must be why he hasn't encountered any demons, despite them supposedly being rampant. Checking his supplies, he notes that his current vial of blood will spoil soon and that he'll need to find a fresh source. As night begins to fall on their journey, an unexpected discovery lies ahead. Duncan suddenly stops, motioning for Kadim to halt as he spots something in a clearing. Through the trees, they see a small rustic village settlement. The merchant suggests they approach the pioneer settlement to ask for food and shelter for the night. Kadim, however, immediately senses that something is deeply wrong. Duncan notices it too. Despite it being dinner time, the entire village is completely dark and silent. Adding to the mystery, the village gate is wide open and unguarded. Worrying that it might be abandoned, the merchant is hesitant, but Kadim decides they need to investigate. An eerie and unnatural silence hangs over the empty settlement. Ignoring Duncan's fearful protests, Kadim strides forward purposefully. At the mere thought of monsters or demons, his hand finds the hilt of his greatsword. He draws his massive blade, not with apprehension but with clear anticipation. Far from being afraid, he flashes a predatory smile, declaring that the possibility of a fight is welcome news. Kadim and Duncan arrive at a remote village shrouded in an unsettling silence. The merchant nervously observes that while the village doesn't seem abandoned, he can't help but wonder what happened to its inhabitants. Suddenly, Kadim's keen senses pick up on a hidden threat, and he halts. His gaze sharpens, focused on an unseen danger that only he can perceive. Startled by the abrupt stop, Duncan bumps into his back and asks why he suddenly stopped. The warrior points out an ominous detail. Among all the closed buildings, only one door remains ajar. Just then, a monstrous foot slams down from the darkened doorway, launching an ambush. A goblin leaps out, weapon drawn, aiming to catch them by surprise. However, the goblin's eyes widen in shock as it realizes its intended victim is already aware of its presence. Before the creature can register its mistake, Kadim cleanly decapitates it with a single, lightning-fast strike. The goblin's upper body is sent flying, its surprise attack ending in its own swift demise. Duncan lets out a terrified shriek as the goblin's corpse crumples just inches from him. But the danger is far from over, as more goblin feet emerge from the darkness. In moments, a whole troop of goblins spills out of the house, ready to swarm them. While Duncan panics, Kadim calmly analyzes the situation, noting that such timid creatures would only become this aggressive if controlled by a more powerful entity. A confident smirk spreads across his face as he realizes this is the perfect opportunity for a fight and a fresh supply of blood. One of the goblins lunges at him, swinging its club with fierce intent. But in a blur of motion, his sword strikes true, cleaving the goblin in half. The remaining goblins are stunned by the brutal display. With practiced ease, Kadim prepares for his next devastating strike, his focus unwavering. Another goblin lets out a fierce war cry as it swings its knife, hoping to overwhelm him with brute force. Before it can even reach him, however, his sword flashes in a blaze of light, cleaving off its head with ruthless precision. Seizing the opening, another goblin tries to attack. But Kadim easily parries the strike, the goblin's weapon no match for his superior strength and skill. Undeterred, the goblin roars and raises its axe, preparing for another powerful strike. Anticipating the move, he spins around, his body coiling for a swift counterattack. He then lunges forward, driving his sword into the creature's chest before it can even swing its weapon. The goblin looks down in confusion, uttering a weak cry at the sight of the blade protruding from its chest. With a final gurgling scream, it collapses from the fatal blow. Kadim stands over the corpse, completely unfazed by the carnage. As the battle quiets, a trembling Duncan peeks out from his hiding spot, asking if all the goblins are finally dead. The warrior thoughtfully replies that he isn't sure, sensing there's more to the situation. His instincts prove correct as a sudden, high-pitched shriek cuts through the silence. From another doorway, a green hand appears, revealing one last hidden goblin. The creature emerges, not to fight, but with a hostage, a young, gagged girl. Duncan gasps in horror, shouting that the monster has a little girl. The goblin screeches menacingly, using the terrified child as a shield. Without a moment's hesitation, Kadim hurls his sword through the air with pinpoint accuracy. The blade flies true, striking the goblin directly in the forehead and killing it instantly. It finds its mark with a sickening thud, a testament to his lethal precision. As the goblin collapses, it drops the child, who tumbles to the ground unharmed. Duncan expresses his relief and awe, remarking on the risky throw that could have easily hit the girl. But Kadim confidently states that wouldn't have happened as he calmly approaches the girl and removes her gag. He looks down at the terrified child and tells her he has some questions. His intimidating presence frightens the girl, but Duncan quickly steps in with a toy, gently assuring her they aren't bad people. He manages to calm her by offering a piece of sweet, dried licorice root. Observing the merchant's gentle approach, Kadim remarks that he is surprisingly good with children. Duncan replies with a sad smile, explaining that he has a son about her age back home. Feeling safer now, the little girl quietly whimpers for her mother. Eager to help, Duncan promises the child that they will find her mother. The girl, however, tearfully reveals a heartbreaking truth. Her parents were the ones who abandoned her. The shocking revelation stuns both men as they realize her parents were the ones who tied her up for the goblins. With this new information, Kadim grimly pieces together the horrifying reality of the village. Just then, a woman's voice cries out for Lenny, and the villagers finally emerge from hiding. Lenny's mother runs toward her daughter, even as other villagers cautiously warn her to be quiet. She sweeps her daughter into a tight embrace, overjoyed to find her alive. Clutching her child, she weeps with relief, thanking God for her safe return. Meanwhile, the other villagers fall silent, stunned by the mountain of goblin corpses Kadim has left in his wake. A man with a torch cautiously approaches Kadim, asking if he single-handedly defeated the monsters. Kadim casually pulls his sword from a goblin's head and bluntly replies, "Number my sword did." His tone then shifts to menacing as he demands an explanation for what he suspects is a vile story. He cuts to the heart of the matter, accusing them of offering their own children as sacrifices to a demon. The villagers stand in shamed silence, unable to deny his accusation. The village spokesman steps forward to explain, detailing how they settled this land after driving out the native goblin population. He recounts that the surviving goblins eventually returned, attacking their settlement with unusual ferocity. The constant raids led to rising casualties, forcing the villagers to take drastic action. They assembled a party to exterminate the goblins at their source, but were unprepared for what they found. Inside the goblin lair, they came face to face with a terrifying demon leading the horde. The spokesman admits they were powerless against the demon and its army, so they surrendered. Instead of slaughtering them, the demon spared the village, but at a terrible price. It demanded a weekly tribute. Each household had to offer up its most useless child as a sacrifice. Duncan explodes in fury, horrified that they would sacrifice their own children, some not even 10 years old. A villager defensively argues back, asking if they should have sacrificed their grown, valuable children instead. When Duncan insists they could have fled, the villager retorts they would have starved if they abandoned their newly planted crops. Fed up with their excuses, Kadim slams his fist on the table, violently shattering it and silencing the argument. He asks a single pointed question: how many horns did it have? Confused but intimidated, the spokesman confirms that the demon had no horns. Kadim processes this vital clue, his expression unreadable. Having heard enough, he simply says, "Good," then picks up his sword and orders the villager to lead the way. The villagers look on, stunned and confused, asking where he wants to go. Kadim stands, his intentions clear as he asks, "Where do you think?" With cold determination, he announces their destination, the demon's lair. Under the cover of night, a procession of villagers lights the path forward with burning torches. Nervous villagers, led by their bearded spokesman, guide Kadim and the merchant, Duncan. The spokesman apologetically informs Kadim that they are too poor to offer any payment. But Kadim coolly dismisses the need for payment, stating he has his own reasons for confronting the demon. Visibly relieved, The spokesman gratefully thanks him for his unexpected generosity. As his only compensation, Kadim takes a sturdy axe from the villagers, since he only brought his sword. After a short walk, the villagers stop, announcing they have arrived at their destination. They point toward a dark, ominous cave, the lair of the very demon they fear. Kadim gazes silently at the cave entrance, his expression unreadable as he prepares for the fight ahead. Then, the spokesman nervously announces their retreat, offering the flimsy excuse that they must protect the village from potential goblin attacks. Duncan is aghast, realizing the villagers have no intention of helping and only came to serve as guides. Declaring that cowards are nothing but a hindrance, Kadim orders Duncan to accompany him as his torchbearer. The merchant can only watch, completely bewildered, as the villagers depart. With the villagers gone, Kadim and a terrified Duncan venture into the dark maw of the cave. Still bothered by their actions, Duncan asks why he isn't blaming them for their cowardice. Kadim counters by asking a chilling question: has Duncan ever come face to face with a living demon? The merchant admits that he hasn't, having only ever seen their corpses at the black market. The warrior explains that a human who confronts a demon is never the same again. He describes how the encounter shatters their will to live, leaving only fear and a desperate craving for survival, adding that while a rare few can overcome that terror, you can't expect such fortitude from ordinary people. Duncan remains unconvinced, arguing that since even beasts value their young, sacrificing one's own children is unforgivable. However, Kadim takes a more pragmatic stance, stating that they simply made a choice for their own survival and shouldn't be blindly condemned. Thinking from the children's perspective, Duncan remarks that it must feel as though the entire world has abandoned them. He then ponders the meaning of a life that can only be preserved by abandoning one's own humanity. His profound question gives Kadim pause, causing Duncan to wonder if he has said too much. The merchant's simple morality forces the warrior to reflect on how warped his own perception has become after wading through a sea of blood. He has a moment of existential dread, wondering if he could ever live a proper life should he return to his own reality. Breaking the heavy silence, Duncan nervously asks if he thinks the kidnapped children are still alive. Kadim closes his eyes, carefully considering the nature of their foe. He concludes that a cunning demon, unlike a simple beast, would have kept the children alive as leverage. Duncan is confused and starts to ask for clarification, but Kadim suddenly raises the axe. Without warning, he prepares to throw it into the darkness ahead. As Duncan cries out in alarm, Kadim focuses his aim with deadly precision. The merchant shrieks as our protagonist unleashes the weapon with incredible force. The axe flies through the air in a powerful spinning arc. With a sickening thud, it strikes something unseen in the shadows. Kadim calmly tells Duncan to bring the torch forward so they can see what he hit. As he does, a large hulking figure stumbles out of the darkness. To Duncan's horror, the axe is embedded in the skull of a goblin scout. The dying goblin glares with its last breath as more red eyes appear in the darkness behind it. Suddenly, a massive horde of goblins swarms out of the shadows, shrieking for blood. While Duncan panics at their sheer numbers, Kadim calmly instructs him to keep the torch held high. Then, he charges forward to meet the oncoming wave head-on. The first goblin shrieks as his sword flashes perilously close to its face. With brutal force, he drives the blade through the goblin's mouth, the tip emerging from the back of the creature's neck. He effortlessly catches another goblin's wrist, stopping its club attack mid-swing. He then shoves the creature back, preparing to dodge the next attack. After swiftly dispatching another attacker, he takes a moment to assess the situation. He notes that the tight quarters and stalagmites will make it difficult to swing his longsword effectively. Undeterred, the remaining goblins growl and prepare for another charge. Kadim wraps a strip of cloth around the hilt of his sword to secure his grip, bracing himself for close-quarters combat. With a collective war cry, the goblin horde rushes toward him. He changes tactics, forgoing wide swings for short, efficient cuts. He slices through a goblin's head with surgical precision. With lightning-fast swings, he tears through the goblins before him, felling several with each strike. His movements are a whirlwind of death as each blow finds its mark. Spotting the goblin corpse on the ground, killed by the axe he threw earlier, Kadim decides to reclaim his second weapon. He yanks the axe from the dead scout's skull, now ready to dual-wield. Wielding both sword and axe, he unleashes a devastating flurry of attacks on the surrounding goblins. They are helpless against his two-pronged assault, their heads cleaved and bodies torn apart. The last attacker falls, its severed head rolling to a stop on the cave floor. Duncan can only sweat and grimace, watching the sheer brutality of the slaughter. Standing amidst a mountain of corpses, he marvels that the warrior managed to kill them all by himself. Their courage broken, the remaining goblins panic and flee deeper into the cave. As blood drips from the reclaimed axe, Duncan points out that the survivors are running away. Kadim announces their next move. They will pursue the fleeing goblins, certain they will lead them to the demon. With Duncan lighting the way, the two venture deeper into the caverns. To the merchant's surprise, they emerge from a narrow path into a much wider, open space. He speculates that this large, carved-out area must be the goblin's main base. Suddenly, Kadim stops, detecting a new presence. He warns Duncan to be careful, explaining that a demon is nearby. He instructs him to keep his distance but not to run, lest the goblins hunt him as a pack, advising him to use the torch for defense if needed. His senses screaming, Kadim's eyes widen as he detects an imminent attack. Just as he turns to react, a demon's claw slices through the air toward him. Despite his speed, he is unable to dodge them all, receiving several cuts on his arms. Duncan screams in horror as he watches the attack, but the warrior simply steels himself, ready to face his foe. The demon reveals itself, a menacing red creature, and notes with interest that Kadim is not a local villager. It cackles, clearly amused by the arrival of a new, more interesting opponent. Kadim immediately realizes this creature is different from what the villagers described. To his dismay, he spots a small but undeniable horn growing from the center of the demon's forehead. He curses under his breath, understanding that a horned demon is a far more dangerous opponent than he was led to believe. Kadim faces off against the horned demon lord, a far more dangerous foe than he anticipated. Cursing his luck, he realizes the demon's growing horn signifies its evolution from a lesser demon into a far more powerful intermediate one. The demon relishes his look of desperation, saying, "I like that expression." In response, Kadim's eyes narrow as he prepares to meet the attack head-on. The demon's claws and his twin weapons collide in a shower of sparks as the first volley of blows erupts. The demon easily blocks his blade, gloating about its preference for weak and obedient humans. Stunned by the creature's speed, Kadim realizes he lost track of its movements, blocking the attack on pure instinct. This confirms his suspicions. The demon's power and agility are far beyond those of a lesser demon. The demon's amusement sours as it warns him that for killing so many of its goblins, he must now beg for forgiveness. He internally calculates the threat. A dozen untrained men could handle a lesser demon, but even elite soldiers aren't guaranteed victory against an intermediate one. Still, the demon offers him a single, twisted chance to survive its wrath. It points a menacing claw at his injured arm and says, "Don't use that arm." Then it orders him to cut off his own arm, chew and eat all the flesh and bone, promising to spare his life if he complies. Kadim assesses the situation. While fighting a proper intermediate demon would be difficult, this one's horn isn't fully grown, presenting a small window of opportunity. Growing impatient, the demon taunts him, demanding to know why he isn't obeying its command. Unfazed, Kadim plants his sword in the ground, declaring that the demon has been quite noisy. He retrieves a water skin, coldly stating that he has no intention of listening to a blood bags like it. With a swift cut of his axe, he slices open the bag, letting the dark red blood of goblins pour out. The demon recoils as a familiar, potent smell hits its nostrils. "Why does a human have that?" it asks in disbelief, as Kadim begins to drink the blood. The now empty water skin falls to the ground, its purpose served. Almost immediately, his body begins to radiate a dark, powerful aura as the blood takes effect. He lets out a guttural roar as the Berserker power surges through him. The demon watches, a flicker of uncertainty now visible in its eyes. His eyes glow a menacing crimson, signaling the activation of his true power. He knows the old blood's effect won't last long and steels himself to end the fight quickly. The demon questions itself, wondering if it's actually feeling fear from a mere human. It quickly dismisses the thought, reminding itself of its own newfound power. Filled with renewed malice, it glares at Kadim and vows, "I'll kill you." Screaming "Die!" it lunges forward in a furious assault. Kadim analyzes his opponent's reckless charge, musing that the creature's judgment must be clouded by its recent evolution. The demon unleashes a flurry of slashes with its razor-sharp claws. But now, powered up, he finds he can see all of its movements clearly. As the demon lunges forward, raking with its brutal claws, he retaliates fiercely with a swing of his axe. The demon shrieks in frustration as its claw is parried. Kadim notices a crack forming on his axe blade from the force of the impact. Undeterred, he resolves to fight with his sword if the axe breaks, and with his fists if the sword shatters. The demon lets out a low growl, its frustration mounting. Enraged by this defiance, it screams, "Unforgivable human." Kadim lunges forward to attack, his glowing red eyes tracking the demon's every move. The demon is stunned by the sudden assault. He puts all his weight and newfound strength into the swing. His sword smashes into the demon's crossed claws with explosive force. The sheer power of the blow forces the massive demon to skid backward. Shaking from the impact, the demon trembles, shocked by the human's incredible strength. Kadim exploits the advantage, his axe already poised in his other hand for the next strike. and with a devastating, sweeping strike, he forces the demon to stagger backward once more. The demon is bewildered, unable to comprehend how a mere human could possess such immense destructive force. It lets out a cry of rage and, with terrifying speed, lunges forward, raising its claws to strike. But Kadim easily dodges the desperate claw swipe. He then slams his shoulder into the demon's chest. The impact sends the creature staggering backward, its feet scraping deep marks into the ground. With lightning speed, he slashes his sword toward the demon. At the same time, he suddenly unleashes a devastating strike with the axe in his other hand, forcing the demon to recoil in terror as it barely dodges the blow. He follows up with a whirlwind of slashes, completely overwhelming the demon's defenses. With a final heave, he prepares to deliver the finishing blow. Sensing mortal danger, the demon desperately leaps back to avoid the strike. His attack smashes into the ground where the demon just stood, shattering the rock beneath. The demon stumbles back, trembling on the ground before the imposing, blood-powered warrior. Terrified, it stares up at its adversary and asks, "What are you?" Kadim glares down, his inhuman power making the demon question if he is truly human at all. It convinces itself that this is no human, but a monster in human form. Trembling with fear, the demon looks for an escape. It suddenly leaps upward, and clings to a stone spike embedded in the cave ceiling, keeping a safe distance from the Berserker. Realizing it is completely outmatched and that a direct charge is useless, it searches for another strategy. Suddenly, its attention is drawn by a frantic shout from deeper within the cave. It spots the merchant Duncan desperately trying to fend off two goblins with a torch. The man threatens the goblins, warning them to stay away from his torch. The bright flame illuminates a dark corner of the cave. A new, sinister plan forms in the demon's mind. If it can get rid of that fire, it can use the darkness to its advantage. Ignoring Kadim for the moment, it changes direction and lunges toward Duncan. As the demon changes its target, Kadim's hand tightens on his axe. He glares, understanding instantly what the creature is planning. He takes a defensive posture, ready to foil the demon's scheme. His eyes blazing with determination, he vows, "I won't let you have your way." As the horned demon lord descends from the cave walls, Kadim stands his ground, radiating a powerful red aura. Empowered by blood, he notes the demon's speed and realizes a direct attack would be easily dodged. With fierce determination, he decides on a new strategy to counter its agility. He grips his massive axe, preparing to unleash a devastating area of effect attack. Instead of aiming for the demon itself, he declares his intention to destroy the very ground beneath its feet. Gathering all his strength, he swings with precision and sends the axe flying toward its mark. The horned demon lord is caught completely off guard by the unconventional attack. The axe whirls with incredible force just before impact, and the ground beneath the demon's feet explodes, shattering into countless pieces from the sheer force of the blow. The tremor catches Duncan and the nearby goblins by surprise. Thrown off balance by the unstable ground, the demon stumbles and falls. As a massive cloud of dust and rock erupts, filling the entire cavern, Kadim, anticipating this, grips his greatsword firmly, waiting for the perfect moment. Temporarily blinded, the demon cries out in frustration as dust fills its eyes. Kadim surges forward through the dust cloud, his sword poised to strike the vulnerable demon. With a savage thrust, he embeds his sword deep into the demon's face. The beast howls in agony as the blade tears through its flesh. He coldly taunts the wounded beast, remarking on its now handsome face. Enraged, the demon struggles to free itself, screaming, "I will kill you." To his surprise, the demon is still alive despite the fatal-looking wound. Straining to pull his sword free, he grunts, finding the resilient demon to be a real pain. As he twists the blade, the demon screams in unbearable pain, begging him to stop. With a final brutal pull, he rips his sword upward, cleaving the demon's skull in two. The demon collapses to the ground, its head split apart as it lets out one last scream of pain. Finally, the demon's body convulses and twists violently as life slowly drains from it. As the red berserker aura fades, Kadim senses his power buff is wearing off. He breathes a sigh of relief, thankful he defeated the intermediate demon just in the nick of time. Hearing a frightened squeak, he turns his attention to the remaining enemies. The surviving goblins tremble, paralyzed with fear after witnessing their master's gruesome defeat. He notes that with the demon's death, their demonic ferocity has subsided. However, showing no mercy, he tightens his grip on his sword. In a flash, he decapitates one of the goblins. He declares that since they have already become monsters, he will kill every last one. A mohawked goblin watches in horror as its comrade's head rolls to a stop at its feet. It sprints away, desperate to save its life. But before it can flee, a sword pierces its head. Spotting another lone goblin attempting to flee, he locks onto his final target. He identifies the runner as the small goblin holding the only torch, and prepares to eliminate it. Just as he swings his sword, Duncan's panicked voice cuts through the air, calling out, "Sir!" The merchant screams in terror, fearing the worst. Startled by the cry, Kadim halts his sword just inches from Duncan's head. Duncan trembles in sheer terror, squeezing his eyes shut. Paralyzed with fear, he sweats profusely as he stares at the blade. After a moment, Duncan stands in shock, struggling to comprehend what just happened. Kadim's murderous intensity fades as he processes the near-fatal misunderstanding. Duncan worriedly points out that he looks pale, to which Kadim offers a curt apology for the scare. When Duncan explains that the children are deeper inside, Kadim resolves to rescue them so they can leave. Visibly relieved, Duncan quickly agrees. Dragging the demon's corpse, Kadim and Duncan move deeper into the cave to find the children. Back at the village, parents cry out in joy and disbelief upon seeing their children return. Tearful parents rush forward, embracing their children in an emotional reunion, while one mother clutches her son tightly, thanking her god Elga for his safe return. The villagers gather around Kadim and Duncan, profusely thanking the mercenary for his heroic deed. An elderly villager gratefully offers him a warm stew, inviting him to share a meal. But he declines, insisting the food go to the hungry and exhausted children instead. He then tells a surprised Duncan to eat with the villagers, stating that he needs to rest. Duncan watches in quiet awe as Kadim strides away, the demon's lifeless corpse slung over his shoulder. His gaze then falls upon one of the rescued boys, whose eyes are wide with trauma. Inside the cave, Duncan recalls the horror he and Kadim had found. They had discovered the children huddled together, mindlessly chanting demonic verses. The children were clearly traumatized, rocking back and forth while begging not to be abandoned again. Kadim had explained to a shocked Duncan that the demon didn't just hold them captive, it systematically brainwashed them. He had detailed the psychological torture, explaining how the demon repeatedly told the children they were abandoned and useless. Kadim had noted that this form of brainwashing was so potent that even a strong-willed priest would eventually succumb. He had grimly added that it was less brainwashing and more like engraving the cruel fact of their abandonment into their minds. Appalled, Duncan had asked why a demon would commit such a cruel act instead of simply killing them. Kadim had explained that it is the nature of demons to feed on the greatest nourishment of all, human suffering and despair. The merchant had been left speechless, struggling to comprehend such profound evil. Duncan finally understood Kadim's earlier words. Had the demon been less cruel, the children would have been killed instead. Hoping for a miracle, he had asked if parental love and repentance could possibly heal their broken minds. Kadim had admitted it wasn't entirely impossible, though his tone suggested it was highly improbable. But he had bluntly expressed his doubt that parents who abandoned their children once could ever show the sincerity needed to save them, crushing Duncan's remaining hope. Duncan had turned away, disheartened by the grim prognosis for the village's future. Back in the present, as Kadim and Duncan leave the village behind, one of the traumatized boys watches them depart. Duncan expresses his shock that Kadim intends to leave immediately without resting. Kadim rejects the idea of staying, explaining that a witness to the Holy Knight's murder has likely come forward by now. While wrapping his wounds, he clarifies that while killing soldiers might be overlooked, murdering a Holy Knight is a crime the faith will not let slide. The realization hits Duncan anew. He is traveling with a man who brutally murdered one of Elga's elite Holy Knights. Kadim warns that the knights could already be on their trail. With a sense of grave urgency, he declares that they must hurry. Meanwhile, miles away, Lady Helia and her retinue of knights stand at the site of the massacre, investigating the murder. Her determined glare makes it clear she is committed to finding the one responsible for her comrade's death. He stabs his knife into the horned demon's lifeless neck, and yanks the blade free. Before the horrified villagers, he holds the demon's severed head aloft, draining its blood into his waterskin. With his emergency supply secured, he considers his primary goal accomplished. As he does, the horned demon's decapitated corpse slumps to the ground. The village spokesman nervously approaches him, asking what he plans to do with the demon's valuable corpse. He dismisses the question, bluntly ordering them to burn the body, as he has no use for it. Confused, the spokesman wonders why he would go through so much trouble only to discard the profitable remains. Spotting an opportunity, the man schemes to salvage the corpse and sell it for a hefty sum. However, his greedy thoughts are interrupted by a warning that the scent of blood will attract other creatures and turn them into new monsters. With a menacing glare, the warrior asks if they're eager to be attacked by rampaging goblins all over again. Terrified into submission, the spokesman stammers that they were just about to burn it. The villagers quickly comply, beginning the grim task of disposing of the demon's body. As Kadim prepares to leave, one of the women calls out to him, It's Lenny's mother who presents him with supplies including new boots and a belt as a token of their gratitude for saving the children. After a moment of consideration, he accepts their offering, promising to put the items to good use. Without delay, he dons the new gear. The new equipment, including a hatchet, proves quite useful, making him look ready for the next leg of his journey. But just as they are about to depart, he suddenly grunts and clutches his chest in pain. His companion, Duncan, looks on in confusion as Kadim realizes the old wound from the Holy Knight is flaring up again. He marvels at how rapidly his body healed from the demon attack, yet the 10-day-old holy wound stubbornly refuses to close. He grimly concludes that the Holy Knight's weapon was no ordinary spear, but a blessed weapon. Meanwhile, back at the massacre site, crows circle over the impaled corpse of the fallen Holy Knight. The formidable Lady Helia stands amidst the carnage, leading the investigation into her subordinate's death. Her knight Eden reports that he cannot find any clues, earning a sharp rebuke for his incompetence. She lectures him on deductive reasoning, noting that the slaughter of the prisoners and lack of stolen gear rules out a simple rescue or robbery. She then questions why the demon's corpse was mutilated, wondering what kind of sacrilegious group could be responsible. Completely missing the point, Eden simply asks her to identify the group for him. Losing her patience, she yells at him to use his own head and find clues. She scathingly remarks that his lack of initiative is why he has yet to advance beyond the rank of paladin. Though Eden internally fumes at her arrogance, he knows he cannot argue with her superior skill. After all, Archpaladin Heliamoviel is a legend, often depicted standing triumphantly over a pile of slain monsters. He recalls her reputation as the Empire's youngest Archpaladin, a rank she earned by single-handedly subjugating 20 demons. He acknowledges that while her personality is terrible, her combat prowess is undeniable. Frustrated, Eden accepts that he is no match for her and can only follow her lead. Sighing, Helia tells him it can't be helped and makes a sudden decision. With the investigation at a dead end, she commands him to bring out the holy relics given to them by Archbishop Arensko. Eden is shocked, identifying the relic as Damien's twin mirrors and protesting its use, since its counterpart shattered not long ago. The twin mirrors were a set of two, one to see the future and one for the past. But the future-seeing mirror broke after reflecting an impossibly powerful being. Helia berates him, reminding him that the Archbishop's nephew is dead, and that this is precisely the kind of situation the relic is meant for. She dismisses his worries, assuring him that the mirror will only break if it reflects a great demon. Reluctantly, Eden hands the ornate star-shaped mirror to her. She kneels amidst the grassy field, preparing to use the holy relic to witness the past. The mirror of the past begins to glow with a brilliant, holy light. A projection erupts from the mirror, replaying the massacre before them. They watch in horror as the vision reveals a barbarian drinking a demon's blood to gain monstrous power. The vision shows the man's sacrilegious rampage as he uses a blessed weapon to slaughter everyone in sight. Helia and Eden can only gasp in shock as the brutal events unfold. The vision culminates in a terrifying close-up of his blood-crazed, glowing red eyes. Suddenly, the immense power proves too much for the relic. The mirror cracks and shatters into pieces. Both knights stare in stunned silence, unable to comprehend that the second of the twin mirrors has just broken. Eden realizes the horrifying implication. The mirror reflected a being on par with, or even more powerful than, a great demon. Panicked, he urges Helia to return to the Holy Capital immediately to report this unprecedented threat. She, however, remains unnervingly calm, questioning why they would retreat now that they know the culprit's face. To Eden's shock, she declares that they will continue their search. Her hand tightens on the hilt of her sword, her resolve unshakable. Then she swings her sword through the air, signaling her readiness for battle. With a look of pure determination, she vows to personally eliminate the fiend in human skin she just witnessed. That night, far from the Holy Knights, Duncan sits by a river, lost in thought. He reflects on the traumatized village children, which in turn makes him worry about his own 8-year-old son back home. Shaking his head, he steels himself against the encroaching despair. He resolves to appease the warrior by any means necessary to ensure his own safe return. He returns to the campsite, intending to prepare a meal for his companion. He's surprised to find him already lying down and approaches to offer some food. As he gets closer, however, he notices something is terribly wrong. He rushes to Kadim's side, only to find him sweating, trembling, and unresponsive. Seeing his condition, Duncan cries out, "Sir, you can tear a demon to shreds. Why are you in so much pain?" He then gasps in horror, seeing the holy wound on Kadim's chest has reopened and is festering badly. Struggling with the pain, Kadim realizes the blessed weapon is the cause of his condition. He deduces the weapon was imbued with a blessing specifically designed to inflict fatal wounds on demonic beings. As a berserker who consumes demon blood for power, he has inadvertently made himself vulnerable to this holy magic. Duncan frets that they should have stayed in the village, but Kadim clarifies that simple rest won't heal a wound like this. Changing the subject, he asks about the phase of the moon, and Duncan confirms it's a waning crescent. Kadim is relieved. He hasn't missed his chance. Tonight is the night. Their conversation is cut short by a sudden, ominous rustling from the dark woods. Duncan grows pale, a sense of dread washing over him as he recognizes the sound. From the shadows of the forest, dozens of glowing yellow eyes emerge, accompanied by low growls. A massive, clawed paw steps into the firelight, revealing a formidable predator. As a snarling, wolf-like creature appears, Duncan identifies the new threat with terror, blade wolves. Despite his weakened state, Kadim lets out a long, weary sigh. He grabs his axe and sword, preparing for the fight. He pushes a worried Duncan behind him and tells him to stand back. Frustrated and exhausted, he curses this world, which seems determined to never grant him a moment of peace. Ignoring the searing pain in his chest, he squarely faces the approaching pack. With grim sarcasm, he readies his weapons, remarking to the snarling beast that they could have timed their get-well visit a little better. The ferocious Blade Wolf pack prepares to attack Kadim and Duncan's campsite. Despite the wound from the Holy Knight throbbing with agonizing pain, Kadim steels himself, ready to face the relentless horde. With a vicious snarl, the first Blade Wolf lunges, initiating a desperate battle for survival. But before it can reach him, he hurls his axe with deadly precision. The axe finds its mark, brutally piercing the wolf's neck in a spray of blood. While the force of the blow sends the dead wolf flying, the rest of the pack remains undeterred. Frustrated, he realizes his blurred vision is preventing him from aiming for the creature's eyes, his preferred weak spot. The brief reprieve ends as more blade wolves surge forward to attack. Having thrown his axe, he stands poised for the next clash, sword in hand. He immediately puts his blade to use, cleaving one wolf before turning his focus to the next at his side. He expertly weaves through the onslaught, cutting down one wolf after another. Suddenly, one of the wolves clamps its jaws onto his sword hand. However, he raises his free hand and delivers a brutal punch to the beast. His fatal punch sends the wolf crashing to the ground. His eyes burn with focus as he endures the pain, continuing his fight. Even with a wounded arm, he manages to smash another blade wolf with his fist. He allows himself a brief moment of relief, but a wolf's snapping jaws suddenly target his leg. He clicks his tongue in annoyance, and lands a final, decisive blow, killing the wolf latched onto his leg. Standing over a pile of corpses, he catches his breath, but the fight is far from over. The remaining blade wolves, cautious but still aggressive, regroup and begin to close in once more. He analyzes the dire situation, knowing that in his weakened state he cannot hold out much longer against their coordinated attacks. Suddenly, his attention is drawn to Duncan shrieking in terror nearby. The merchant frantically waves two flaming torches, screaming at the encroaching wolves to stay away. Seeing no other way to win, Kadim resolves to drink the demon blood, accepting that while it may worsen his condition, it is his only choice. The wolves pause, sensing a change in the air as he prepares his gambit. Without hesitation, he downs the entire waterskin of viscous demon blood. He then tosses the empty container aside as the potent liquid begins to take effect. A sinister red aura erupts from him as the demon blood supercharges his body, causing the holy wound on his chest to glow ominously. The blade wolves instinctively recoil, startled by the sudden surge of demonic power. His eyes glow a menacing red, signaling the activation of his blood berserker trait. Moving in a blur, he effortlessly decapitates a nearby wolf. The wolves that were about to attack Duncan turn their full attention back to the newly empowered Kadim. They lunge at him en masse, but he cuts them down in a flurry of strikes. Meanwhile, Duncan can only watch in wide-eyed horror as the battle intensifies. Kadim's blade becomes a bloody streak, tearing through the pack with his newfound strength. Now a whirlwind of destruction, he effortlessly carves a path through the horde. He recalls that his blood berserker buff grants different effects based on the type of demon blood consumed. Despite their fear, the remaining wolves let out a final, desperate roar and charge forward. His glowing red eyes narrow as he focuses his new power. In a lightning-fast flurry of swings, he cuts them down. The buff from the horned demon's blood has manifested as a massive boost to his agility. Remembering the demon's frustrating speed, he now realizes he wields that very same power. Completely outmatched, the surviving blade wolves finally break rank and begin to flee. A bewildered Duncan shouts that the wolves are running away, mistakenly thinking the danger has passed. However, Kadim senses this is no simple retreat. They are making way for something else. Just then, the ground trembles as a massive, clawed paw slams down with immense force. Both men are stunned as a new, far more intimidating figure emerges from the darkness. The scarred face of the Blade Wolf pack leader appears, its eyes glowing with malice. Duncan stammers in fear, pointing out that this new monster is twice the size of the others. Kadim grimaces, confirming they are now facing the pack's formidable leader. But his confidence shatters as he feels the agility buff from the demon blood begin to wear off at the worst possible moment. The pack leader charges, closing the distance in an instant, but he deftly dodges the attack and rebounds. Suddenly, he feels an immense, crushing pain, as if some invisible power is trying to flatten him with its weight. He strains, his muscles screaming as the immense pressure overwhelms him, causing him to lose his grip on his weapons. He stumbles, clutching his chest as the cursed wound reopens with searing pain. Duncan rushes to his side, frantically asking if he's alright, as Kadim collapses. Holding up the barely conscious warrior, Duncan desperately tries to keep the pack leader at bay with his torches. Kadim gasps for air, his vision blurring as the holy sigil on his chest burns with agonizing pain. The giant wolf snarls, preparing to finish them both off while Duncan makes a futile attempt to shield him. Ignoring the beast before him, Kadim suddenly looks up at the sky, realizing a specific condition has been met, much to Duncan's confusion. A look of dawning comprehension crosses his face. His eyes widen. The moment he has been waiting for is finally here. He gazes at the moonless night sky, recognizing that the perfect conditions for his hidden power have arrived. With renewed purpose, he slams his sword point first into the ground, beginning a mysterious ritual. He begins to chant, invoking the name of Atala, the undefeated master of 10,000 soldiers. As a bewildered Duncan looks on, Kadim continues his prayer, asking the ancient warrior to bless his blade for the coming slaughter. The incantation speaks of, "The night the eye that watches over the land hides itself," fulfilling the moonless sky requirement, as he declares his intent to bestow a blood-soaked name upon his simple sword. A shockwave of golden energy erupts from the blade, stunning both Duncan and the pack leader. The giant blade wolf rears back, startled by the sudden and immense surge of power. Duncan can only gape in utter disbelief at the incredible phenomenon unfolding before him. A massive pillar of fiery spiritual energy engulfs Kadim, a sign of his power awakening. As the power swirls, a mystical prompt seems to ask, "What name will you give this sword?" He recognizes the familiar reverberation of will from his first life and prepares to give his answer. With absolute certainty, he bestows upon the sword its new, peculiar name, Mosquito. The declaration causes the fiery energy to flare violently around him and his newly named weapon. A brilliant crimson light then bursts forth from the blade as the naming ritual is completed. A unique, stylized sigil appears etched onto the sword, forever marking it as Mosquito. Kadim smirks with grim satisfaction, having successfully unlocked one of his most powerful unique traits, the one who bestows names. Now armed with his newly named sword, Kadim unflinchingly faces the charging Blade Wolf leader. Watching from the sidelines, Duncan cries out in terror, believing the barbarian is about to be devoured. Kadim effortlessly dodges the massive beast's lunge and delivers a huge cut around its neck, but the blow is not enough to finish it off. The moment his blade makes contact, however, a system notification announces that a special effect has been activated. As Mosquito bites into the wolf, a dark red aura envelops the blade, activating its vampirism skill. The life-draining effect immediately begins to heal his wounds, giving him the strength to continue the fight. The Blade Wolf leader lets out a mocking snarl, seemingly unimpressed by the small amount of life being drained. Acknowledging the healing isn't enough on its own, he smirks and challenges the beast to another round. With renewed vigor, he suddenly leaps forward and strikes at the Blade Wolf's skull, driving Mosquito deep into the creature's head as the vampirism effect glows intensely with the fatal blow. He holds his position, allowing the vampiric sword to absorb as much life force as possible from the dying beast. The continuous life drain works wonders, and a system notification soon confirms that all of his wounds have been healed. To his utter astonishment, he realizes that even the persistent, fatal wound from the Holy Knight's blessed weapon has completely vanished. Standing victorious amidst a field of wolf corpses, he ironically notes that the monster's arrival was actually quite helpful. He inspects the strange new script on his sword, recognizing its vampirism effect, which restores life by dealing damage to an enemy. He then pragmatically assesses the new power's limitations. Its low-grade nature makes the healing inefficient, and it's useless against bloodless foes. Deciding this newfound power is sufficient for now, he takes a deep breath, reflecting on the true strength of his trait, the ability to grant special effects to items without needing any rare materials. He considers the future possibilities, realizing that if the conditions are met again, he can create even more unique weapons. Yet, drawing on a hard-learned lesson from his past life, he tempers his excitement, knowing that expecting too much too soon only leads to trouble. Just then, a trembling Duncan peeks out from his hiding spot, cautiously asking if the terrifying battle is finally over. Emerging from hiding, he is shocked to see the entire wolf pack massacred and wonders how the severely injured barbarian is even conscious. Rushing to Kadim's side, Duncan is left speechless to find him standing perfectly unharmed, the holy wound completely healed. With the danger past, Kadim turns to the merchant with a pointed question. Why didn't you run away? Duncan is completely flustered by the unexpected inquiry, haven't expected anything but that. Kadim spells it out, reminding the merchant that he had the perfect chance to escape when the wolves had him cornered. The merchant's mind races as he processes the logic, a look of dawning realization spreading across his face. Duncan stammers an excuse about being chased down, but Kadim's smirk shows he knows the merchant isn't being entirely truthful. In that moment, Duncan quietly realizes the truth. He was so consumed with worry for the injured barbarian that fleeing never even crossed his mind. Utterly exhausted, Kadim tells Duncan to stand watch for the night while he gets some much-needed sleep. Before turning in, however, he issues a terrifyingly graphic threat about making a rope from the merchant's intestines should he try to run. The gruesome threat paralyzes Duncan, who knows a man like that would undoubtedly keep his word. Trapped by fear, a miserable and tearful Duncan keeps watch over the campfire throughout the long, lonely night. The next morning, a weary, sleep-deprived Duncan continues the journey, his face a mask of misery. He briefs Kadim on their travel plans, explaining they have another 10 days of trekking through the Empire's southern region. Kadim, wary of the authorities hunting him, asks about the likelihood of crossing the border without trouble. His top priority is clear. He would rather not run into another holy night if at all possible. Duncan assures him that their chosen route is poorly guarded, but cautions that they are more likely to encounter bandits instead. Confident in his companion's power, he nonchalantly adds that mere bandits should be no obstacle for a mighty barbarian. The merchant points out a small, remote castle on their route where they can safely restock on food and supplies, explaining that the Elga Fate's influence probably doesn't reach that far. Tracing the path on his map, Duncan shows Kadim a shortcut called the Golden Road that will lead them directly to their destination, Vestana. Kadim contemplates the arduous journey ahead, acknowledging that while difficult, it's a vast improvement over the hellish days of his past life. He recalls how, 300 years ago, the fractured kingdoms of the East were deeply distrustful and hostile toward any outsiders. In those days, a massive, intimidating barbarian like himself would have been met with immediate suspicion and aggression. The memory brings to mind his first meeting with Melissa, who initially regarded him with the same disgust one would an insect. He reflects that he couldn't blame the sheltered young mage for being wary of a fearsome barbarian suddenly asking to travel with her. A flashback shows her notes from their first encounter, in which she speculated he might be a criminal or even a human-monster hybrid. A faint smile touches his lips as he dismisses the fond but ultimately useless memory of his old friend. Duncan pulls him from his thoughts, reassuring him that the modern Free Cities Alliance is much more accepting of outsiders. Noticing Kadim's silence, a nervous Duncan frantically insists that he is telling the truth about the Alliance's hospitality. Suddenly, their path is blocked by a tense standoff between two groups of rough-looking men. Kadim turns to his guide, asking the experienced traveling merchant what he makes of the situation. Duncan surmises that one group appears to be bandits harassing another, seemingly unrelated group of thugs. Sensing that getting involved will only lead to unnecessary trouble, Kadim suggests they find another way around. But it's too late. The thugs being harassed spot his imposing figure and immediately begin shouting and pointing in his direction. He clicks his tongue in annoyance, frustrated that their attempt to avoid the confrontation has failed. The bandits, alerted by the shouting, turn their attention from their victims to the approaching barbarian. Wary of the newcomer's size, the bandits draw their swords and clubs, preparing for a fight. With no other choice, Kadim moves forward, ready to swiftly end this inconvenient interruption. His expression is unreadable as he sizes up the bizarre situation. To his surprise, the leader of the thugs throws his head back and lets out a triumphant shout. He turns to the bandits and yells, "Did you see that? You bastard said he wouldn't come. Come on, try messing with us now that he's right here." As the bandits begin to flee, another thug shouts, "Hey, they're running away. Hurry up and go tell your idiot boss." The thugs laugh uproariously as the bandits retreat, shouting for them to tell everyone that Agon's raging horn is here, leaving Kadim completely bewildered. Utterly annoyed, he glares at the men and coldly asks, "What are you doing?" Their leader smugly thanks the barbarian for his assistance, asking if he should formally address him as Agon's raging horn. Kadim lets out an exasperated sigh, flatly denying the title and giving them an ultimatum: get out of his way or die. The thugs are shocked into silence, their celebratory mood instantly evaporating as they realize their critical misunderstanding. They exchange nervous, wide-eyed glances as the terrifying implication of their mistake sinks in. The thug leader's face hardens with anger and humiliation as he slowly reaches for his dagger. His fear turning to fury, the leader explodes, demanding to know who the hell Kadim is to interfere, screaming and calling him a good-for-nothing bastard. While Duncan shrieks in terror, Kadim remains perfectly calm, utterly unimpressed by the thug's pathetic outburst. Enraged by the failed bluff, the thug leader and his gang surround our protagonist, demanding to know how he'll take responsibility for the mix-up. Our guy calmly assesses the situation, noting their sudden bravado now that they believe he's just some random barbarian and that they have him outnumbered. Just then, their attention shifts to Duncan, as one of them eyes the merchant's massive backpack, questioning if he's hiding something valuable, and they aggressively order the terrified guy to come forward so they can inspect the bag. Losing patience, he lunges towards him, but Kadim pushes him back with his elbow. And before he can lay a hand on the merchant, our guy silently intervenes. After that, the thug demand financial compensation, arguing that the barbarians' interference means they now have to fight their rivals without reinforcements. But Kadim, however, remains utterly unimpressed by their attempts at intimidation. Scoffing at his silence, Horsel sneers and suggests an alternative form of payment. They propose a new deal. Since he looks strong enough, he can fight alongside them while impersonating the legendary barbarian, Agon's Raging Horn, and reminds him how easily their rivals were scared off earlier. In a scoffing manner, they even try to coach him on the act, telling him to just shout, "I am Agon's Raging Horn," during the fight. The Horsel smugly declares that helping them will settle the score, crudely telling him that a real man takes responsibility for his actions, and questions his manhood in a pathetic attempt to provoke him. After that, the entire gang erupts in laughter, mocking his barbarian appearance and jeering that his silence must mean he's too scared to speak. From behind, Duncan watches with growing anxiety, wondering if our guy is holding back simply to avoid getting tangled up with a bunch of petty bandits. Deciding the matter is settled, Horsel confidently pats him on the arm. That single touch is the final straw. A dangerous glint appears in Kadim's eyes. Completely oblivious to the danger, as the thug cheerfully suggests, they introduce themselves as new partners and ask for the barbarian's name. With chilling calm, he agrees to share his name, unsheathing his sword in a flash. And before the thug can even process what's happening, he decapitates the head clean through his neck, which rolls across the dirt, his smug expression frozen in death. The others stare in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the sudden, brutal execution of their comrade, and their leader's shock turns to pure terror as the reality of the situation crashes down on him. While the bandits scream in horror over their comrade's death, Duncan simply looks on, completely unsurprised by the bloody outcome. Fueled by fear and rage, they draw their weapons and foolishly charge, warning him that he won't leave alive. As they charge, he holds his bloodied sword aloft and formally introduces himself. "My name is Kadim," and declares his lineage with deadly seriousness, the great warrior of Atala. After a few moments, his axe stands still and a butterfly briefly lands on it. Taking a hold of the weapon, he pulls it out of the victim's head, and he calmly inspects its condition. With a chipped edge and a loose joint, clearly not designed for serious combat. He decides that he'll need to find a proper axe at the next castle, and tucks it away into his belt. The last surviving thug, their leader, is paralyzed with fear, having lost control of his bladder at the sight of the massacre. He trembles in shock, muttering the names of his fallen comrades as he realizes they are all dead. Then Kadim turns his cold, silent gaze to him. Panic finally takes over, and the thug leader turns to flee for his life, but trips himself and crashes face first into the dirt. Kadim pins the man to the ground with his foot, calmly stating that this new arrangement means he won't have to pull out his axe again, and then issues a chilling ultimatum: answer every question, or have his spine crushed, due to which the thug lets out a scream of pure agony and terror as pressure is applied. He begins his interrogation, asking about their gang and the identity of Agon's Raging Horn. The bandit can only groan in pain, too terrified to form a response. Seeing the interrogation is going nowhere, Duncan steps in to explain that Agon is a city in the center of the Free Cities Alliance, and elaborates that the city is famous for its massive arena, and that Agon's Raging Horn is a legendary gladiator and multiple-time champion. So our guy begins to piece it together, realizing they must have mistaken him for this legendary champion. Duncan, however, finds the story unlikely, arguing that a warrior of that stature wouldn't bother coming to such a remote area no matter the pay. Just then, from the ground, the captured bandit insists his boss and the famous gladiator are best friends, claiming the horn would come running if asked, and deliriously boasts that they'll all be dead meats once Agon's Raging Horn shows up. He also reveals their gang, the Blood Cave Gang, is in a turf war with the rival Black Hammer Gang, and explains that their boss supposedly called on his famous friend for help after being pushed out by the rival gang's superior numbers. After that, Duncan looks down at the rambling man with pity and bluntly tells him that he has been completely scammed. and lays out the simple logic: a true friend of that stature would have set him up with gold in a city, not let him languish as a petty bandit. By hearing this, the bandit is left speechless as the devastating truth of his boss's lies begins to sink in. And he struggles to accept the reality that his boss was a fraud and that his hero was never coming. Meanwhile, our guy decides his course of action and concludes that since he's already killed several gang members, it's better to eliminate the rest before they can ambush him. He also rationalizes that wiping them out is not only practical for survival, but also a good opportunity to loot supplies and find a better weapon. And with his decision made, he orders the captured bandit to lead him to the Blood Cave Gang's hideout. In response, the guy tries to refuse, but our guy presses down harder on the spine, intensifying the pain, and his protests quickly turn into screams of submission. They soon arrive at the entrance to the Blood Cave Gang's hideout, a simple cave guarded by 2 sentries. Deeper inside the cave, the gang's leader, Graham, sits impatiently on a makeshift throne. He rests his chin on his fist, looking thoroughly unimpressed with his current station in life. In a private monologue, he hypes himself up, introducing himself as the leader of the gang and a brothers to the famous Agon's Raging Horn, and screams in his delusion, claiming he made a name for himself as a proud and brave gladiator in Agon's prestigious arena. But the fantasy shatters as he admits the truth: he was a mediocre gladiator with a pathetic 1-4 record, and the Horn has no idea who he is, and confesses that he only lied about sending for help because his own men were pestering him, knowing the legendary warrior would never actually come. He then wonders where his life took such a wrong turn. All he wanted was a simple life, scraping by as a bandit chief with his crew of gullible idiots who bought into his exaggerated stories, and curses the rival Black Hammer Gang, blaming them for pushing into his territory and ruining his comfortable, if pathetic, existence. Just as he's sarcastically wishing for the Horn to actually appear, one of his men stumbles into the cave, frantically announcing that his wish has come true, and screams that Agon's Raging Horn is really here, leaving Graham completely stunned. But his frantic plea for the boss to save him is abruptly cut off when something strikes him on the back of the head. Graham is bewildered by the sudden silence and his subordinate's desperate cry for help. The answer arrives in the form of Kadim, who appears at the cave's entrance. Graham looks on in wide-eyed horror at the brutal sight, and takes in the distinctive barbarian attire and the warrior's imposing physique. He shouts, "Don't tell me, is it really legendary Agon's Raging Horn?" But without answering him, our guy points his sword directly at the gang leader and asks a simple question: "Are you the boss?" Utterly terrified and confused, Graham can only stammer, "Who?" as he stares at the imposing figure who has just butchered his men. He stands menacingly before the terrified bandit, his silence more intimidating than any threat. Graham's mind races. He has seen the real Agon's Raging Horn before and immediately knows this terrifying stranger is an imposter. Stunned, he wonders where this barbarian could have possibly come from to attack their gang, and quickly assesses that if this man made it this far, all his subordinates outside must already be dead. So finally concludes that regardless of his identity, this intruder is an undeniably dangerous enemy. Frustrated by this sudden intrusion, he clenches his fist, preparing for a fight. And deciding to take the initiative, he lunges forward, determined to strike the first blow. However, our guy is unimpressed, finding it merely interesting that the bandit plans to fight him barehanded. Tapping into his fighting spirit, Graham's eyes glow with power. But then our guy is stunned to see the sudden turn of action, when Bandit's leader kneels before him and desperately begs for his life, calling him Big Brother. As he offers up the gang's valuables, Kadeen coldly tells him to stop calling him Big Brother. Watching from the side, Duncan recognizes the bandit's desperate groveling, wryly noting it's a posture of someone begging for their life. Just then, Graham panics and asks in confusion why he is raising his sword. In a last-ditch effort, he promises to pay a regular tribute if he will just spare his life, but despairs, realizing his pleas are useless and that he's about to die pathetically despite having survived the brutal arena. Just as he gives up hope, however, a sudden desperate idea strikes him. Yelling to stall his execution, he offers Kadim a treasure map, and clarifies that it's a map leading to the location of a legendary dwarven throwing axe. The mention of a rare dwarven weapon immediately piques Kadim's interest. Just then, Graham eagerly claims the legendary axe is the one was crafted with the very heart and soul of dwarven artisans. His interest secured, and orders the bandit leader to keep talking. However, the bandit leader breathes a sigh of relief, knowing he's hooked him with the promise of rare dwarven equipment, and continues his sales pitch, describing the axe's magical properties such as a blade that never dulls and the ability to fly toward its target. Our guy internally confirms the value of the offer, recalling that dwarven equipment has excellent stats and special effects, far beyond human-made gear. But obtaining dwarven equipment, however, is an extremely difficult task. In this world, fantasy races like dwarves and elves exist, but they are minor races that keep to themselves. And he knows that since dwarves dislike humans, they would never willingly sell their equipment, which makes it incredibly rare. But if the bandit's words are true, this is an opportunity he cannot miss, because high-performance weapons are absolutely necessary, if only to avoid relying too much on demon blood. So having made his decision, he gets straight to the point, demanding, "Where's the map?" Feeling he now has some leverage, the bandit's leader tries to negotiate, asking for a guarantee of his life first because clings to the map as his only lifeline, unwilling to give it up so easily. But he scoffs at the very idea that a mere bandit thinks he's in any position to negotiate. Without warning, he demonstrates his displeasure by stabbing him non-fatally with the tip of his sword. As the bandit screams in agony, he informs him that he has a few negotiation tricks of his own. He then gives him a chilling ultimatum: start talking, or he'll keep putting holes in him until he's nothing but a rag. Paralyzed with fear and pain, Graham can only tremble as he clutches the blade embedded in his shoulder. Meanwhile, the scene shifts to the hideout of the rival Black Hammer gang, and there, a scout frantically insists to his comrades that his report is true. But the other gang member bicker over the credibility of his unbelievable report. Their argument is cut short, however, when their boss slams a massive warhammer down, silencing the room. The leader is then revealed, sitting on his throne, and demands a clear summary of the situation. And the leader Kravan asks for confirmation on the rumor that the legendary gladiator, Aegon's Raging Horn, is helping the Blood Cave gang. Then, the two of his subordinates nervously confirm that the report is correct. Just then he narrows his eyes, questioning whether a story like that makes any sense at all. But his men insist it's true, swearing they saw a barbarian as massive as a bear alongside Graham's forces. He considers this, recalling the persistent rumors that Graham and the famous gladiator were close friends. However, he dismisses it as nonsense, concluding Graham likely just hired a large mercenary to bluff his way through their turf war. Yet, despite his skepticism, he can't completely shake the small possibility that the legendary warrior has actually appeared. Just then, another lookout bursts in, shouting that they're being raided by the Blood Cave gang. When leader asks for their numbers, the lookout reports that there are only 2 attackers, and confirms that one of them is a massive barbarian, matching the description of Aegon's Raging Horn. After that, the gang members are shocked that just 2 people would dare to attack their entire hideout alone. Kravan's expression darkens as he considers the terrifying possibility that the rumors might be true after all. Knowing they stand no chance in a direct fight against such a legend, he quickly formulates a plan for an ambush, and orders his crossbowmen to take positions behind a barricade and fire on his signal. With his plan in place, he lifts his warhammer, ready to verify the attacker's identity himself. Meanwhile, Graham is leading our guy through the woods, announcing that they're almost at the hideout, and nervously asks if he seriously plans to just walk right into the enemy's main base. But Kadim turns the question back on him, asking if he lied about the treasure map being located in their territory, which makes him panic, and he begins to explain that they originally hid it in their territory, but since they lost it to them, sweating profusely, he voices his concern about walking so openly into a massive hostile bandit camp. Hoping to deter the barbarian, he wildly exaggerates the gang's numbers, claiming there are at least 100 vicious members. Unfazed, Kadim simply notes that 100 is quite a lot for a frontier gang, completely ignoring the suggestion to retreat and gather mercenaries. He casually states that killing 100 men will be tiring, so they should hurry up dismissing the supposed threat entirely, and states his only concern is getting the map and returning before sunset. Graham is left utterly speechless by his insane confidence in the face of 100 enemies. As he and his captive arrive, they are met by Kravan, who stands ready with his massive warhammer. The 2 men lock eyes in a tense, silent standoff. Just then, Kravan breaks the silence, sarcastically greeting Graham and demanding to know his business. Seeing an opportunity, he boldly declares that he has come to announce the downfall of the Black Hammer gang. Putting on a show for Kravan's men, he proudly introduces his companion as his close friend, the legendary arena champion, Aegon's Raging Horn. The members of the Black Hammer gang are stunned, their worst fears seemingly confirmed, and smirks, hatching a plan to escape in the chaos while the gang is distracted by the powerful barbarian. But his plan is cut short, however, when Kadim grabs him by the hair, angrily asking what he thinks he's doing. Then yells for all to hear, making it perfectly clear that he is not. Aegon's Raging Horn, holding up the treacherous Graham, addresses the gang, stating he has no desire to fight so long as they hand over what he came for, and calmly tells them that there is no need for bloodshed. Hearing this denial, a wide, predatory grin spreads across Kravan's face as he realizes the truth. "You're not Aegon's Raging Horn? I knew it."
Hey everyone! If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out and lets me bring you more great content.
Cravan smirks, assuming the barbarian is just another mercenary hired with money by Graham, and he probably betrayed his employer after realizing he was dragged into a death trap like this. Still, he is puzzled by Kadim's unnatural calm, wondering why he's so composed despite clearly not being the legendary Agon's Raging Horn. Then the Black Hammer boss slams his massive hammer into the ground, signaling his subordinates. From the fortress walls, his archers take aim with their crossbows. Meanwhile, more of his men, hidden in the bushes, advance into position for the attack. Soon, our guy and Graham find themselves completely surrounded. Believing Kadim is just another mercenary, Cravan offers to cooperate in finding whatever treasure he's after. But he coldly dismisses the offer, stating that Graham already knows the location and that Cravan's men simply need to get out of his way. At the mention of a map, Cravan's face contorts with confusion. Just then, he brandishes a map and asks, "Is this what you're talking about?" To which Graham is utterly horrified, stammering in disbelief at how Cravan could possibly possess it. Cravan, however, reveals he already knew about the map, explaining that his own men found it and that its existence has drawn many treasure seekers. With a smug look, he correctly guesses that our guy has come for the treasure marked on it. Kadim's eyes widen as he identifies the map. Just then, with a wild laugh, Cravan suddenly begins to tear the precious map to pieces. To see this, Graham panics, shouting at him for destroying their only lead. But Cravan ignores him, and after tearing the map to shreds, he swallows it. To which Graham screams, "It's crazy." After swallowing it, Craven pats his stomach and challenges the barbarian to try and take it from him now, then taunts Kadim one last time, daring him to retrieve the ingested prize. Unfazed by the disgusting challenge, our guy calmly states that he will gladly do so. With a grim smile, he adds that he'll need to hurry if he wants to get the map before it passes into Cravan's stomach. Realizing Kadim is serious, he frantically orders his men to fire their crossbows and stop him at all costs, to which they unleash a volley of bolts. Kadim's eyes flash as he prepares to act. In a split second, he grabs the terrified Graham, who can only stammer out a cry to run. With brutal pragmatism, he shoves Graham forward, turning him into an unwilling human shield. A hail of crossbow bolts flies directly toward them. Just then, Graham is riddled with arrows, screaming in agony as our guy uses his body to block the attack. Cravan is stunned into silence, shocked at the sheer ruthlessness of a man who would use his own employer as a meat shield. Meanwhile, our guy remains perfectly still, listening to Graham's dying screams with a cold, impassive expression. Cravan can't comprehend the level of brutality he's witnessing, and realizes he's not dealing with a simple mercenary, but a genuine lunatic. However, he rallies his men, ordering them to aim for Kadim's exposed body parts and reload as fast as they can. One of the crossbowmen fumbles with his weapon, cursing as he tries to reload. But before he can fire again, our guy hurls his axe with deadly precision. Just then, the crossbowman's eyes go wide with terror as he sees the axe spinning toward him. The axe finds its mark, embedding itself deep in his skull. The impact is devastating, ending his life in an instant. After that, our guy glares menacingly from behind his blood-soaked shield. The other archers panic, shouting that their comrade Rodgo has been killed by the barbarian's thrown axe. Undeterred, our guy continues to advance, using Graham's body to absorb more crossbow bolts as he closes the distance. Another bolt pierces through Graham's hand, eliciting a fresh scream of pain. At that moment, he screamed, "Just kill me instead of using me like this." Furious at his men's terrible aim, Cravan screams at them to either shoot all at once or cease fire entirely. Abandoning the failed strategy, he bellows for all his remaining men to charge. With a war cry, the gang rushes forward to engage Kadim in close combat. His usefulness at an end, our guy grants Graham's wish. He then contemptuously tosses the corpse on the charging bandits. Assessing the sheer number of opponents, he decides he can't risk a serious injury in a prolonged fight. To end the battle swiftly and decisively, he pulls out a water skin filled with demon blood, and after drinking it, a powerful red aura erupts around him. Cravan watches in confusion, wondering if the barbarian is simply quenching his thirst. But as he drinks, our guy feels an incomparable elation as the demon blood's power surges through him. Crimson energy envelops his body, preparing him for the slaughter to come. His eyes begin to glow a piercing red, signaling the activation of his berserker state. The bandits charge forward, mocking what they assume is an easy kill. Yet, in the blink of an eye, they halt in confusion as they realize Kadim has completely disappeared. Before they could react, he instantly decapitated two of them. Panic erupts as the men frantically search for the barbarian, who is now moving too fast to see. The demon blood takes full effect, granting him a massive boost to his speed. Now a crimson blur of death, he weaves through the crowd, cutting them down with terrifying efficiency, and his speed is so great that his enemies are dead before they even see him coming. Just then, the remaining men cry out in terror, realizing they're being slaughtered by an enemy they can't even track. His sword flashes through the night, a streak of deadly light, and he effortlessly decapitates 3 of them in a flurry of lightning-fast strikes. Kravan watches in disbelief as his men are systematically butchered, unable to comprehend what's happening. Struggling to process the scene, he wonders if this barbarian somehow possesses divine power, but he can only conclude that he is witnessing the power of a true monster when our guy slices through another bandit without slowing, his crimson eyes already locked on the next kill. Kravan gulps, finally understanding the sheer difference in power between them. In a desperate gamble, he calls for one of his men to bring him a loaded crossbow. Then he prepares to take matters into his own hands, readying the weapon for a single, decisive shot. He watches Kadim's movements closely, noticing a brief pause after each kill, and as the numbers dwindle and the distance grows, these pauses become increasingly frequent. He waits patiently, tracking the Berserker as he cuts down more of his men. Then he identifies the pattern. After a kill, Kadim momentarily shows his back as he turns to find his next target. As our guy dispatches another bandit and turns, he sees his opening, and fires, sending the bolt speeding directly toward the barbarian's exposed back. The bolt flies true, aimed perfectly at the momentarily vulnerable warrior. But just as the bolt is about to strike, Kadim senses the attack from behind. While Kravan grins with grim satisfaction, believing he has finally landed a fatal blow. As the crossbow bolt flies true and close to its mark, Kadim's berserker eyes lock onto it. Kravan stares in utter disbelief, and his celebration is cut short as, instead of finding its mark, the arrow is stopped cold in the berserker's bare hand. Unfazed, he grips the caught arrow and snaps it in 2, his crimson aura flaring with contempt. To which the gang leader can't comprehend the scene, wondering what kind of monster catches an arrow with his bare hand. Now, our guy is ready to stomp forward. He then casually drops the broken arrow to the ground, his imposing presence freezing the bandits in their tracks. Panicked by this relentless advance, Kravan orders his men to reload their crossbows. And one of the bandits rallies his men, screaming for them to charge and stop him from reaching their boss. In response, our guy unleashes a whirlwind of steel, his sword cutting through the charging bandits, and now the battlefield becomes a blur of motion and gore as he carves a path through them. Amidst the carnage, his cold red eyes remain fixed on his true goal. Kravan realizes in horror that the berserker has no intention of stopping, instead prioritizing the troublesome crossbowmen. Desperately, he asks how many loaded crossbows they have left, learning they have only 3 shots remaining. With a plan forming in his mind, he tells his subordinate to listen carefully. He hands the arrow to his subordinate, then pulls the hammer from the ground. With a guttural roar, he braced himself for the brutal attack. Yet Kadim continues to advance, unwavering in pursuit of his ultimate goal. And with ruthless ease, he cuts through Kravan's subordinates to clear his way. The gang leader knows that, having cleared the subordinates blocking the way, he can close the distance in an instant, and even if he swings his hammer, he won't be able to land a hit. At that very moment, he begins to think of another plan, but his thoughts are abruptly interrupted as our guy rises from the dust, and he tightens his grip on the hammer. Just then, Kravan screams, "Eat this, you barbarian bastard," as he raises his hammer high into the air. And then, smashing it onto the ground, he created exactly the opening he needed. The impact shook the ground, shattering debris and momentarily distracting our guy. "You idiots, now," Kravan shouts, giving the signal to his hidden archers. At his signal, multiple crossbow bolts are fired in a coordinated volley towards the blinded warrior. But Kadim dismisses the ambush as nothing more than petty tricks. While the arrows fly, Kravan grabs his own dropped crossbow and quickly loads a bolt, preparing for his own follow-up shot. Our guy, however, effortlessly deflects the volley of arrows, taunting him for his cheap tricks. When suddenly, Kravan shouts, "Hey, barbarian, let's see you try to catch this too." And our guy notices that Kravan suddenly appears from below, ready to shoot an arrow at his face. The gang leader doesn't hesitate, firing his crossbow at point-blank range anyway, and laughs maniacally, certain that a shot at this range is impossible to dodge. But Kadim stands firm, even with an arrow piercing his face, and his eyes burn with a feral, predatory gleam. Kravan's confidence shatters as he realizes his final gambit has failed. Just then, our guy closes the distance in an instant and slashes at Kravan's legs. Kravan can only let out a choked gasp, completely overpowered. As he kneels to the ground with his paralyzed legs, he screams in agony. He desperately thinks the arrow must have been a direct hit. How did he dodge it? To the shock of all, Kadim snatched the arrow with his teeth and flung it from his mouth with disdain. Kravan is paralyzed with fear, having just witnessed someone catch an arrow with his teeth from such a distance. Just then, Kadim tells him to wait quietly while he deals with the rest of his subordinates. The bandit boss can only listen to the screams of his men as they are slaughtered, realizing it's hopeless. Finally, Kadim's sword slams into the ground next to Kravan, signifying the end of the massacre. With the battle over, he calmly addresses the terrified gang leader, who can only admit, "I know it's a bit late to bring this up, but..." Kneeling amidst the bodies of his men, he begs for his life, to which our guy assures him that he won't kill him, but he will slice open his stomach to retrieve the map. Panicked, Kravan screams that there's no need for that as he has the map's contents memorized, and hastily explains that the map leads to an ancient treasure hidden in a black chest at Molden Castle. Then our guy questions why a bandit like him wouldn't have already taken the treasure for himself. To which he explains that his gang was forced to move because Molden Castle is currently surrounded by hundreds of soldiers. Cutting him off, our guy demands to know which troops are besieging the castle and why. Kravan reveals that it is Viscount Adlin's army, sent to execute the demon Baron of Molden for allegedly making a pact with a demon, and adds that rumors suggest there are other hidden motives at play. That it's likely a political fabrication, because if there were real proof, the Holy Knights of the Elga Faith would have intervened. Our guy reflects that his simple quest for a map has suddenly become far more complicated. Deciding he can't trust the word of a bandit, he readies his sword, intent on verifying the story by taking the map himself. Then states plainly that he doesn't believe him and asks, "Didn't you say it earlier to take it if he can?" Before striking the final blow, and the gang leader can only curse his fate as his life comes to an end. Later that night, our guy and Duncan are gathered around a campfire. Then our guy presents the gruesome, bloody mess of paper to the merchant, telling him to piece the map together. Duncan is horrified when he nonchalantly reveals he retrieved the map from the bandit's stomach, and explains that since the man had torn up and swallowed the map, he simply took it back from the source. After piecing together the grisly puzzle, the merchant confirms the map's details match what the bandit boss had said, and he concludes that the story about Molden Castle must also be true. The title Demon Baron catches the attention of our guy, making him pause as he considers his next move. Meanwhile, Lady Helia's investigation has led her to the village Kadim recently passed through. A nervous villager lies to her, insisting no one has passed through their village recently. Recalling the villager's story, Lady Helia begins her interrogation. She challenges them, demanding they swear before Elga that no mercenary passed through their village. Terrified, the village spokesman and his wife reluctantly confirm their story, their fear palpable. Still unconvinced, she narrows her eyes and repeats her demand, telling the woman to swear to it. However, the villagers are paralyzed, remembering Kadim's dire warning to never mention him or the demon to anyone, and his chilling threat to return and slaughter them all hangs heavy in their minds. Indeed, the sheer intensity of his promise still terrifies them to their core. Recalling his promise to massacre everyone if they speak, the woman sweats profusely, yet still swears their story is true. Helia finds the situation strange. After all, the traces of her target led directly to this village, so how could no one have passed through? But the woman desperately maintains the lie, swearing on Elga's name that no mercenary came through. But Helia's sharp intellect catches him in a slip-up, as she points out that she never specified her target was a mercenary. To this, the woman immediately realizes his grave mistake, his face contorting in panic. Knowing she's been lied to, the Holy Knight's expression hardens while she silently draws her sword. The weight of her lie, coupled with the sight of the drawn blade, sends her into a state of sheer terror. Just then, they hear a piercing scream that instantly draws their attention. Reacting to this, Helia inquires, "What is that sound?" Trying to cover their tracks, the woman frantically pleads with the Holy Knight to pay it no mind, insisting it's nothing. Unswayed by their pleas, however, she remains silent and suspicious. She enters the house and is immediately struck by a palpable evil presence. There, she discovers a young man named Moroni convulsing violently on the floor, clearly in agony. She immediately diagnoses it as severe demonic possession, but the boy's mother desperately lies, claiming it's just a chronic illness he's had since he was young. Ignoring the mother's protests, she steps forward to deal with the possessed boy. But the mother grabs onto her leg, begging the Holy Knight not to interfere. Helia then begins a powerful prayer, calling on the Lord of Light to have mercy on the soul stained by an inner demon. With the final words, she consecrates this lamb. She channels her holy power into him. A blinding flash of holy light erupts from her hand, engulfing his head. The radiant energy fills the entire room, the clear sign of a powerful purification ritual. The other villagers watch, stunned, feeling a warm and holy energy they've never experienced before. As the light fades, Moroni goes still, his convulsions finally ceasing. His mother rushes to his side, tears of relief streaming down her face, as Helia announces that the child has been saved from the demon the devil had planted now and forever, and adds that the child's soul shall never again suffer from the devil's whispers. Overcome with gratitude, the mother begins to thank the Holy Knight for saving her son. But in an instant, her gratitude turns to horror as she looks up from her son's body. In a shocking display of fanaticism, Helia raised her flaming sword and decapitated the boy with merciless precision. Then she coldly states her doctrine: a lamb once stained by evil, even if purified, cannot be allowed to live, and according to her faith, one who has forsaken the light must offer their life as a sacrifice to wash away their sin. The mother is left in a state of catatonic shock, unable to comprehend why her son's head is suddenly missing. Then the horrific reality sets in, and she breaks down, letting out a wail of pure agony. Helia callously comforts the grieving woman, stating that she only took his life after destroying the inner demon, and that he will now rest eternally by Elga's side. Her mercy, however, does not extend to the mother, whom she condemns as an unbeliever for breaking her oath to Elga. Threatening the woman with an eternity of wandering in endless darkness, Helia demands she confess the truth immediately. Finally, with her leverage established through brutal fanaticism, she asks her true question: that evil spirit, where did the barbarian go? Meanwhile, far from the village, Kadim and Duncan rest by a campfire under a starry sky. Duncan reports on their now abundant supplies, gratefully noting that they have more than enough food thanks to Kadim having wiped out 2 bandit gangs. But he apologetically adds that despite the loot, he couldn't find the high-quality weapons the warrior was looking for. Changing the subject, Kadim asks him if he knows anything about the Lord of Molden. Duncan recalls hearing the Lord called the Demon Baron, speculating the name comes from either his harsh rule or an actual contract with a demon. However, he also recalls meeting a merchant who spoke fondly of Molden, suggesting the Lord can't be all that evil or greedy. Kadim scoffs at the notion, explaining that plenty of demons grant prosperity, only to rip it away later to feed on the resulting pain and despair. He resolves to investigate Molden himself, but worries if his meager supply of demon blood and single sword will be enough. He then contemplates his small water skin of blood, questioning if it contains enough power to break through the hundreds of soldiers besieging the castle. Timidly, Duncan interrupts his thoughts to ask a question. To this, Kadim gives him a questioning look, waiting for him to continue. Duncan asks about the title Great Warrior of Atala that Kadim used earlier, curious about who receives such a special designation. Kadim's eyes narrow as he suspiciously asks the merchant why he's bringing this up. He nervously explains that he's heard the famous mercenary, Aegon's Raging Horn, also calls himself the Great Warrior of Atala. And aside from that legendary mercenary, he hadn't known anyone else who claimed the title of the Great Warrior of Atala. To this, Kadim's fury ignites, and his sudden surge of murderous intent makes Duncan recoil in terror. The merchant immediately falls to the ground, apologizing profusely for his deadly sin of asking a useless question. Kadim begins to explain, the Great Warrior of Atala is not a mere nickname, but a sacred title held by only one person. It is bestowed upon the chosen warrior who bears the sacred mission to slaughter great demons for their god, Atala. Then clarifies that there can never be 2 great warriors at once, as only the title holder can receive the power to end a great demon's life. And this leads him to 2 possibilities. Either Aegon's Raging Horn is an ignorant impostor, or, more disturbingly, his god Atala has forgotten him and chosen a new champion. Pushing his anger aside, he tells Duncan to get up and rest, informing him they will be leaving for Molden at daybreak. Relieved, the merchant scrambles to his feet to prepare for the night. As Duncan settles down, Kadim is left to ponder whether this new great warrior is an impostor or a sign that he has been forsaken by his god. Either way, he makes a grim vow he will tear this Aegon's Raging Horn apart the moment they meet. The grim, imposing fortress of Molden Castle is besieged under a dark and stormy sky. Inside, weary guards stand watch, their faces etched with the fatigue of a long siege. From the battlements, they look out over the vast encampment of Viscount Adlin's army. More of Baron Molden's soldiers patrol the walls, their expressions grim and determined. Hidden in the nearby bushes, Kadim and Duncan scout the perimeter of the military camp. Overwhelmed by the sight of hundreds of soldiers, Duncan questions how they could possibly enter the castle. Unfazed, Kadim tells the merchant to find a safe place to hide, as he intends to go in alone. Duncan panics at the thought of him taking on the entire army, but Kadim clarifies that he'll just use the cover of night to deal with the sentries. But just as he formulates his plan, the heavy portcullis of Molden Castle begins to rise. A completely unexpected development. Stunned, they both watch as the gate unexpectedly opens. Duncan frantically asks what's happening, wondering if Baron Molden is planning an all-out war. Kadim, however, sees the opening gate not as a problem, but as a perfect opportunity, realizing there's no time to hesitate. and he quickly grabs the bewildered merchant, telling him to hold on tight. Wreathed in a blood-red aura, he draws his sword and prepares to charge. With Duncan slung over his shoulder, he launches himself forward, his eyes glowing with berserker rage as he announces his intent to break through in one go. As the castle gates open fully, a contingent of Baron Molden's soldiers marches out to meet the enemy. One of the soldiers looks up, confused by the sudden appearance of a single charging barbarian. Before the man can react, a blur of motion rushes past him. It's Kadim, moving at inhuman speed as he decapitates through the first rank of soldier, and his head flying from his shoulders in a spray of blood. Without breaking stride, our guy continues his deadly charge. Just then, he carves a bloody path through the Baron's men, limbs and heads flying in his wake. Yet the remaining soldiers watch the slaughter unfold with unnervingly blank expressions, which is extremely strange. Our guy notes with confusion that they show no agitation or fear as their comrades are killed right before their eyes. Deciding he doesn't have time for curiosity, he continues his brutal assault. With his eyes fixed on the open gate, he resolves to break through while he has the chance. He plants his foot and launches himself forward again with explosive force. Quickly, he closes the distance on a soldier who appears to be their commander. With brutal precision, he plants his foot on the commander's skull and smashes his skull mercilessly, a brutal display of force. Catching his breath for a moment, the berserker stands amidst the carnage. Having carved his way through, he notes he's reached the man at the front, dropping Duncan to the ground. All around them, the battlefield is littered with the dismembered bodies of Baron Molden's soldiers. After that, our guy turns his cold, red-eyed gaze toward the leader of the now decimated force. The leader, Baron Molden, looks on in shock, asking the blood-soaked barbarian what he is, and formally demands to know who this stranger is, declaring himself as the lord of this castle. However, our guy cynically asks if he's the infamous demon baron and questions why he's outside the castle walls. With regret, the baron denies the rumor of demonic kinship, explaining that other factors are involved. Unmoved by excuses, Kadim insists he'll discover the truth himself, urging him to follow. Baron Molden desperately protests, explaining that he came out to sacrifice his life for his people, so this was his plan all along. Kadim silences him with a blunt, "Shut up, you can die later," his priorities clearly set on interrogation, not honor. The scene shifts back in time, where two of Molden's guards wonder where their lord's plan went so wrong. A flashback shows Baron Molden himself bringing water to his soldiers on the wall, who are surprised to see their lord among them. A young soldier named Delton insists the Baron shouldn't be doing such menial work, but his lord warmly compliments him on becoming a proper soldier, and dismisses their concerns, stating that staying on high alert for 4 months is much harder work. Then he laments that his soldiers are suffering because of his own incompetence as a lord. This says a lot about his character. Delton passionately refutes this, blaming Adlin's wickedness and affirming that it is their honor to follow him. He listens to his soldiers' loyal words with a heavy heart. He thanks his men, but resolves that he cannot let them suffer any longer. To this, they are left confused by their lord's somber and cryptic words. Later, inside his chambers, he comments to his wife that the weather is warming, meaning they won't have to worry about firewood, and stands silently for a moment while his wife sits patiently in the background. She cuts to the chase, knowing he didn't come just to talk about the weather, and asks what truly brings him to her. He wistfully remembers the tulip bulbs she had ordered from the Alliance's territory and planted last year. Then he remarks on her wonderful aesthetic sense, and how beautiful it would have been if the tulips had bloomed. The Baroness dismisses the thought, stating that with the castle suffering from famine, tulips hardly matter. After that, he sadly recounts seeing starving children digging up and eating those very tulip bulbs, stuffing them into their mouths even as he watched, a heartbreaking sign of how desperate the situation has become. With a sharp gaze, his wife asks if he scolded the children for it. He replies, "Scold them for what?" while taking full responsibility for the suffering of his people, and explains that after 4 months under siege, their winter provisions are gone and the people are forced to hold farming tools as weapons. With grim determination, he tells his wife that he will end everything today and die an honorable death because he believes that if he dies, Viscount Adlin will no longer have a justification to continue the siege, a truly desperate decision. To this, the Baroness cries out that the Demon Baron rumor is a lie and not the real reason for the attack. He calmly explains that to their enemies, the truth is not what's important, only profit and justification. He then lays out a desperate contingency plan. If his death doesn't stop the Viscount, she must send a messenger to the Emperor or defect to the Alliance for help. Solemnly, he entrusts the future of Molden and its people to his wife with a heavy heart. She accepts, as he asks her to lead their territory wisely. Just then, he declares that the long, dragging battle will end today with the death of the Demon Baron, and this was his plan for a noble sacrifice, a plan that has now been completely interrupted. Back in the present, the Baron's remaining soldiers rush to his side as Kadim holds him captive, asking if their lord is all right. And he can only stare at his captor, wondering who on earth this mysterious barbarian is. Suddenly, one of the remaining soldiers screams in terror, pointing toward the opposing army, and everyone's attention snaps toward Viscount Adlin's soldiers, who are standing in formation. Then, Adlin's men begin to stir, letting out guttural groans as a strange aura surrounds them. One soldier screams, his eyes glowing with a demonic red light, revealing that they are all possessed. This finally explains their strange, emotionless behavior. Kadim and the Baron's men can only stare in shock at the horrifying transformation of the entire enemy army. With authority, the Baron commands his men to close the castle gates at once. The massive portcullis begins its descent, threatening to seal the entrance. But the demon-possessed army is undeterred, continuing its relentless advance on the closing gate. They march forward with lifeless, terrifying expressions. They show no fear at all. Baron Molden and his soldiers realize with dawning horror that something is deeply wrong with the attacking army. Meanwhile, Kadim spots a soldier wielding a spear and snatches it from him with ease. Now armed, he coldly tells the nobleman, "Bring me that spear." With a surge of power, Kadim braces himself, ready to hurl the spear at the charging army. He then hurls it like javelins with incredible force toward the possessed soldiers. The spear finds its mark, piercing through the advancing horde, and it decimates the front lines of the attacking army. A brutal display of power. The Baron and his men can only watch in shock, exclaiming, "Who's that barbarian?" After that, Kadim simply says, "Next," as he prepares for his next move, as if this was nothing to him. And just then he launches a volley of spears, streaking through the air toward the charging army. The spears pierce the frontline soldiers, killing many of them. Terrified, the Baron's men realize the crazed attackers won't stop, and they must close the gate quickly. As the gate continues to lower, it seems the castle will be sealed just in time. But suddenly, the gate grinds to a halt, leaving the Baron and his men wondering what happened. High above, the soldiers at the winch panic, shouting that the mechanism is jammed and won't budge. The Baron looks on in absolute despair, muttering, "Oh no, my God," just when they thought they were safe. Watching the predicament, Kadim clicks his tongue in annoyance. Taking charge, the Baron orders his men to gather at the gate and sends soldiers to find an engineer. He continues to command his troops, sending the strongest soldiers to the winch. But Kadim ignores the orders, calmly walking up to the half-closed gate himself. A soldier points in shock, alerting the Baron to what he's doing. Our guy places his hand firmly on the massive iron portcullis. The soldiers watch in disbelief, wondering if he's actually trying to pull the gate down himself. With a guttural roar, he puts his back into it, straining against the immense weight. With a groan of stressed metal, the massive portcullis begins to move upwards, an unbelievable feat of strength. As he lifts the gate, the soldiers realize the enemy is already at the entrance, remembering that a dozen of their strongest men couldn't even budge it. Baron Molden frantically orders his men to cover him, telling them to throw anything they can to slow the enemy's advance. On his command, his men launch their spears with precision, but their spears are not enough to hold back the tide of possessed soldiers pouring through the widening gap. Having lifted the gate high enough, Kadim tells everyone to stand back. With a final monstrous effort, he prepares to let the gate fall. And the massive portcullis slams down with thunderous force. It crushes the possessed soldiers who were trying to swarm through the entrance. Kadim scoffs, satisfied with his work. Standing before the now closed main gate, he declares, "That should do it, right?" The Baron and his men can only stare in awe, questioning if their savior is even human with such monstrous strength. Turning to the stunned nobleman, Kadim suggests they have a calm talk. Later, inside the castle, a proper meal of meat, bread, and stew is served. Baron Molden welcomes his guests, admitting it's been a long time since he's been able to entertain, while Duncan marvels at the sight of proper food. He greedily slurps down his soup and immediately asks for another bowl. Kadim, however, eyes the feast suspiciously, questioning how they can have so much food during such a long siege. It's a very sharp observation. The Baron explains that as a matter of honor, he would carve flesh from his own thigh before letting a guest go hungry. Kadim scoffs at the talk of honor, asking if that's also why he tried to throw his life away. The Baron quietly admits that, to some extent, it was. Our guide demands the full story, wanting to know why he led a suicide charge. The Baron agrees, stating that he must go back in time to explain everything. And he begins his story explaining that Molden was once a barren and unsafe land. As a young man, he received the Emperor's command and was determined to make it a good place to live. Over a dozen years, he poured his heart and soul into the land, transforming Molden into a prosperous and peaceful city. And due to its remote location, he believed Molden's peace would last forever. However, he reveals that one man's greed and jealousy changed everything, and that man was his neighboring lord, Viscount Adlin. The Baron explains that as Molden prospered, the jealous Viscount began to spread false rumors. Adlin branded him a demon baron, claiming he had signed a contract with a demon. Kadim and Duncan listen as the Baron recounts how, at first, no one believed such baseless rumors, but the situation changed when the fourth prince fell for the Viscount's daughter, giving Adlin a direct connection to the imperial family. With the Emperor's tacit approval, Adlin's words were no longer seen as nonsense, and the subjugation of the so-called demon baron began. He concludes his story, explaining that after 4 months under siege, he intended to sacrifice his own life to end his people's suffering. In other words, he was ready to die to save his people. Kadim finds the story strange, questioning how a 400-man army could maintain a siege for 4 months without any gains or resupply. A very logical inconsistency. The Baron has no answer, weakly suggesting the imperial family might be secretly helping them. Our guy remains silent, clearly unconvinced by this explanation. Having told his story, the Baron turns the tables, asking who Kadim is and why he broke through the enemy camp to get here. Kadim states that he's looking for something in Molden, specifically a fish-shaped rock in the exact center of the castle. The Baron is shocked, confirming that such a rock does indeed exist in the castle's basement. Good. Take me there, Kadim commands, promising to leave quietly once his business is done. But the Baron immediately refuses, declaring that entry to the basement is forbidden. To this, Kadim's expression hardens as he demands to know the reason. The Baron replied firmly that he could not tell an outsider, unfortunately. So much for their newfound alliance. The air grows heavy as Kadim glares, his patience clearly wearing thin. Duncan feels the sudden shift in atmosphere, noting how the once friendly Baron has become so incredibly firm. Both men stand tense, locked in a silent standoff. The tension is palpable. During a tense standoff, Kadim questions Baron Molden's sudden refusal to grant him access to the castle's basement. He sighs in frustration, realizing his surprisingly smooth infiltration was just too good to be true. Of course, it was never going to be that simple. Losing his patience with the Baron's defiance, he makes a swift, threatening move, grabbing a knife from the dinner table. Baron Molden is visibly startled by the sudden aggression. In a flash, Kadim slams the knife down on the table. Though shocked, the Baron doesn't flinch, holding his ground against the clear threat. To illustrate his point, he crushes a large insect, grimly warning the nobleman that his 100 soldiers will meet the same fate by tomorrow, a brutal yet effective visual threat, and coldly reminds him that his men are trapped by the surrounding enemy, and that hiding will only briefly delay their deaths. He then emphasizes the futility of resistance, stating the soldiers will be crushed just like that bug, dying in vain without ever knowing why. Deciding he doesn't need a reason for the secrecy, he simply offers him a choice. The brutal ultimatum is laid bare: guide him to the basement quietly, or be forced to do so after he slaughters all his people, a truly impossible choice. The Baron weighs the terrifying proposition, acknowledging to himself that the threat is very real. Resigned, he admits his mistake in allowing such an unpredictable outsider into his castle. With no other option, he concedes, agreeing to guide him to the basement. However, just as Kadim seems to have won, he adds a condition, stating they cannot go immediately. Kadim eyes him with suspicion, questioning this last-minute condition. The Baron proposes a deal. He will grant Kadim access to the basement if he helps defend the castle from Viscount Adlin's coming attack after the Baron surrenders and dies, and explains that once he is gone, Adlin will certainly launch a desperate, all-out assault. A truly bizarre and desperate proposal. Once the attack is repelled, he promises, his steward will lead the warrior to his prize. Kadim openly scoffs at the plan, calling the idea of an honorable death for his people ridiculous. The Baron is stunned into silence by the scathing critique of his noble intentions. Kadim condemns the plan as abandoning his duty and leaving the consequences to a complete stranger. The Baron has no response, forced to contemplate the harsh truth in the warrior's words. After that, our guy lectures that while self-sacrifice can appear noble, the Baron's plan is anything but. He is merely trying to dump his burden on others and take a coward's way out. A harsh but undeniably true assessment of the Baron's plan. Then, clenching his fist, Kadim declares that the Atalan way of a warrior is different. He then describes how an Atalan fights to the bitter end, even when their limbs are twisted and their skulls are smashed. With unwavering intensity, he defines this brutal defiance against all odds as a true honorable death, a very different and far more violent definition of honor. Baron Molden stares at the knife and the crushed bug, silently processing the warrior's violent but profound philosophy. Having made his point, he proposes a different offer, inviting the Baron to hear him out. Later, the merchant Duncan is shocked to see the two men talking again after their heated confrontation. Kadim presses for a final answer, asking the Baron what he has decided. Baron Molden agrees to consider the new offer, sending Kadim and Duncan to a guest room to await his decision. A steward leads the unlikely pair through the inner castle to their temporary quarters, and they enter a well-furnished room. To Duncan's surprise, the intimidating warrior generously tells him to take the bed and get some rest. While the merchant fidgets, Kadim calmly prepares his equipment, anticipating the coming conflict. Duncan sits anxiously on the edge of the bed, clearly too unsettled to relax. He finally summons his courage, asking Kadim if he truly believes the Baron will accept his deal. Kadim answers confidently that it's a good deal for the Baron, who has no other choice anyway. Relieved, Duncan admits he was worried when the previously accommodating Baron had suddenly turned so stubborn. He then wonders aloud why the nobleman was so desperate to keep them out of the basement. Kadim turns to him with a knowing look, claiming the reason is obvious. A confused Duncan asks what could possibly be so obvious. But their conversation is cut short as the door to their room swings open. Baron Molden has returned, his decision presumably made. He stands before them, his posture and expression showing a newfound resolve. It seems Kadim's words had a profound effect. Noting the Baron's quick return, Kadim cuts to the chase and asks if he's made up his mind. With a firm nod, Baron Molden confirms he has. Satisfied, Kadim says, "Good, then get ready," as night begins to fall over the castle. On the moonlit castle ramparts, preparations for a sortie are underway. Two guardsmen stand watch, unaware of the impending action. One of the guards is startled by the sound of approaching footsteps. They raise their spears, challenging Kadim and the Baron as they emerge from the darkness. The guards are stunned in the silence when they realize their leader, Baron Molden, is accompanied Kadim. Delton's fellow guardsmen question why their lord is out so late and wearing such strange battle armor. However, the Baron calmly instructs his officer to maintain composure and help him. Still confused, Delton asks what's happening, but his lord simply orders him to help secure a rope. He then gives his men clear instructions to tie a rope securely to the rampart pillars. And whatever happens, do not step outside the castle. Following their lord's orders, the soldiers secure the heavy rope to the stone battlements. With the rope secured, Kadim steps to the edge of the wall, ready to descend. He effortlessly rappels down the massive wall, his movements shockingly swift and silent. A shocking display of agility for a man his size. From atop the wall, the soldiers watch in disbelief, amazed that someone with his massive frame can move so agilely. As Baron Molden prepares to follow, Delton urges him to be careful. Before descending, the Baron calls out the names of his most trusted men, starting with Skellen and Odik. He continues his solemn roll call: Kren, Benin, Chirad, Dunpin, and finally, Delton. To this, Delton acknowledges his Baron's call, his voice filled with concern. Baron Molden entrusts them with a task more precious than his own life, to protect Molden itself. The weight of their lord's final words leaves Delton and the other soldiers shocked and somber. This is clearly a farewell. His farewell is complete, he descends the rope to join Kadim on the ground below. Kadim waits patiently at the bottom, wryly asking if he has finished his goodbyes. To this, Baron Molden gives a simple, resolute reply: "I am." Just then, Kadim draws his sword. With their alliance now forged, he turns to the determined Baron and says, "Good, then let's go." Their deadly, shared objective is clear. They are heading out to kill Viscount Adlin. Stunned by the plan, Baron Molden can only ask, "What did he just say?" Inside the relative safety of the castle, the two men finalize their strategy. Kadim lays out his audacious plan. Just the two of them will raid the enemy camp at sunset, armed with only a sword and a spear. The Baron is incredulous, asking if charging the camp with only two men isn't just a death wish. At this, Kadim coldly points out that since the Baron was already planning a suicide charge, death was the expected outcome either way. Caught off guard by his brutal logic, the Baron is momentarily stunned into silence. The warrior explains that whether the Baron surrenders or fights to the death, his demise would remove Viscount Adlin's justification for the army's presence. He then questions him, reminding him that sacrificing his own life was the fundamental goal from the start. Baron Molden worries that a failed raid would only provoke the Viscount into destroying Molden completely in retaliation. But Kadim confidently dismisses his concerns, assuring him they will end the Viscount's life during the raid. Left speechless by the warrior's absolute conviction, the Baron can only stare in disbelief. As a contingency, Kadim promises that if they fail to kill the Viscount, he will still honor his original deal to help defend Molden. At this, the Baron reflects that he would have considered such confidence pure arrogance if he hadn't already witnessed the man's incredible abilities firsthand. Reminding him that he was planning to die anyway, Kadim frames the raid as a no-lose opportunity to eliminate the source of the disaster. He then imparts the warrior's creed he lives by: keep striking down the enemy until your dying breath. Under the cover of night, the duo begins their infiltration and immediately encounters sentries guarding the perimeter. Without a word, a blade hurls towards them, signaling the beginning of the assault. Through the hurling blade, Kadim silently and efficiently dispatches the first guard before he can even raise an alarm. The guard cries out in pain while the other guard, caught completely by surprise, looks at him. He then looks around for the source of the attack, but finds only eerie silence. Before the man can even process what's happening, Kadim closes in for the kill and impales his sword into the soldier's neck. The soldier dies instantly. As he stands over his fresh kill, he feels that something is off during the day. It's unnerving that the soldiers show no reaction to seeing their comrades killed right in front of them. His instincts scream that something is terribly wrong with this army. Kadim examines the dead soldier's gaunt, emaciated face, realizing he's nothing more than skin and bones. He deduces that this level of starvation is extreme, which makes it all the more suspicious that these soldiers haven't deserted. Pushing past the bodies, he continues deeper into the enemy encampment. A tense expression crosses his face as he processes this grim discovery. Baron Molden, still processing the swift and brutal killings, watches him with a questioning look. But the warrior remains focused on the mission, his eyes scanning the path ahead. With grim resolve, he simply tells the Baron, "Let's go deeper into the camp." And so, the two warriors press forward into the heart of enemy territory. They soon discover the camp is unnervingly active, with soldiers wandering about instead of sleeping. The Baron is baffled, wondering why the soldiers are awake and wandering the barracks without even taking off their armor. Just then, one of the wandering soldiers, its expression hollow and lifeless, slowly turns its head towards them. Its eyes are devoid of life, confirming Kadim's suspicions of a demonic influence. Suddenly, they find themselves surrounded by a horde of groaning, zombie-like soldiers. Kadim tasks the Baron with holding the line while he pushes forward to confront their leader. Confused, the Baron asks who exactly he's going to look for. Kadim states the obvious. He's going straight for the commander, Viscount Adlin. He then explains to the shocked Baron that as the commander, the Viscount must possess the strongest demonic malice. Kadim then gives his final order to the Baron, "Go wild to your heart's content until your dying breath," and reminds him that these are the very enemies who destroyed his land and people. His precious treasure inspired by those words, Baron Molden finds his resolve and prepares to fight for his home. Just then, our guy readies himself and hurls two knives towards the two zombie soldiers, and the knives pierce the throats of the mindless soldiers. After that, he prepares to carve a path through the horde, now armed with a sword and an axe. With brutal efficiency, he cuts a swath through the seemingly endless waves of enemies. He notes with grim satisfaction that his theory was correct. The soldiers are nothing more than puppets. The Baron can only watch in stunned silence as Kadim tears through the possessed army. His blades move in a blur, decapitating soldiers with ease. He continues his relentless assault, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. Another soldier screams as it charges. Resorting to sheer brute force, our guy pierces straight through the soldier's head. Covered in blood but completely unfazed, he pauses for a moment after the kill. However, he observes that the deeper he goes, the wilder the soldiers get, confirming that the demon is concentrating its power to stop him. Realizing the significance of the increased resistance, he knows his hunch was right. He sees a large, lit tent in the distance and realizes he's headed in the right direction, the commander's tent. Without hesitation, he bursts into the tent, ready to face the source of the corruption. Inside, he finds Viscount Adlin seated on a makeshift throne, surrounded by his personal guard. The guards are clearly under the same spell, their bodies surrounded by a sinister purple aura. The Viscount himself is also radiating a powerful demonic energy. The possessed guards immediately spring into action, moving to intercept the intruder. As they do, the Viscount's eyes snap open, revealing glowing red pupils that signify his demonic possession. Just then, the demon-possessed Viscount mockingly welcomes him, congratulating the shameless wild dog for making it this far. Far from being intimidated, Kadim greets the taunt with a confident smirk. Our guy finds the situation interesting, recalling that he only encountered a few possession-type demons during his first playthrough. And he realizes he stumbled upon a rare type of enemy and seems to relish the upcoming challenge. Sitting on his throne, the Viscount scoffs at our guy, saying, "What's so funny?" and states that he can see Kadim's trivial body, calling him a pest and warning him to leave Baron Molden alone. Comparing its long-laid plans to a cultivated orchard, the demon angrily asks if a wild dog like him truly thinks he can interfere with the harvest. Unimpressed by the villain's monologue, Kadim coldly tells it that it sure likes to yap. Seeing that the warrior won't back down, the demon declares that he has just chosen to give up his life. And with that, a massive wave of red demonic energy erupts from the Viscount's body as he prepares to attack. At this, Kadim is momentarily surprised by the sheer volume of demonic power being released. As it prepares its ultimate technique, The demon tells him to bid farewell to his petty ego. Its power continues to swell as he roars that from this moment on, Kadim's flesh belongs to it. The malevolent energy then surges towards him, attempting to overwhelm and possess him. His eyes widen as he feels the full force of the demon's malice trying to invade his consciousness. Just then, the demon explains its technique. It is pouring all of its malice into him, and any slight crack in his consciousness will allow it to take complete control. But the possession attempt suddenly stalls, leaving the demon confused and questioning what's happening. A vision of his past life as an office worker flashes through his mind, the source of his unshakable modern soul. Following this vision, the demonic energy dissipates harmlessly around him. The demon feels pain when his demonic energy possession attack is deflected. Reeling in shock, it exclaims that its possession failing is impossible. Still in disbelief, he questions how its malice is being denied and why it can't take over the warrior's body even with its full strength. Our guy simply smirks, offering a mock apology and explaining that the slot for a soul in his body is already filled. A brief vision of his former self, a spectacled office worker, confirms that his transmigrated soul is acting as an impenetrable shield. Kadim stands defiantly as the remnants of the possession attempt fade away. The demon recalls that the only other time its possession failed was against a higher-tier demon, making this human's resistance completely baffling, and states that he initially suspected a high-tier demon was inside the Kadim, but now sees it's just a demon possessing a large human. He then grins menacingly, shocked to have been bested by a mere human. Enraged, it tells the wild dog not to get cocky, vowing that if it can't take his body, it will take another approach. With that, the demon decides to simply crush him, transforming Viscount Adlin's body into a monstrous, hulking beast. He then roars that it will just have to crush him into pulp. Gripping its massive mace, the beast prepares for a devastating attack. Kadim braces for the incoming blow, his expression hardening with focus. The demon then swings its enormous spiked mace with incredible speed and force. However, our guy manages to block the strike with his axe, but the impact is immense. The force of the blow sends him skidding backward as he struggles to hold his ground. And his axe, unable to withstand the demonic power, has a small piece broken off from the impact. With his primary weapon useless, Kadim clicks his tongue in frustration. The monster roars in triumph, winding up for another bone-crushing swing. But he quickly dodges, stepping back just as the mace smashes into the ground where he just stood. The impact sends dust and debris flying as he creates distance from the beast. Now on the defensive, Kadim faces the towering beast from afar. The demon mocks him, calling him a pathetic, shameless wild dog for turning tail and running. Now wielding his broken axe, Kadim calmly assesses that the mace was clearly meant for the demon's new hulking form. He correctly deduces that a normal weapon like his axe won't be able to withstand a head-on clash with the massive mace. After that, he calmly studies his opponent, formulating a new plan of attack. The battle rages on in the encampment, just outside the walls of Molden Castle. The demon's foot glows with red energy as it taunts Kadim, asking if he's looking for a place to run. Meanwhile, its army of possessed soldiers surrounds our protagonist, boxing him in. The beast notes that while he may have killed a few of its puppets, it still has over 300 more to use. A possessed soldier lunges forward with a sword, but Kadim is ready. Our guy effortlessly dodges their clumsy attacks, his mind still focused on the larger threat. He then retaliates with a swift swing of his axe, and brutally smashes a soldier's head, clearing a path through the horde. He continues his deadly dance, cutting down the possessed soldiers one by one. Just then, the monstrous demon brings its mace down in a powerful overhead smash. Kadim narrowly dodges the attack, the spiked weapon just missing his face. The mace pulverizes the ground, but he has already leaped back to evade. The demon growls that there's nowhere for the wild dog to run. However, Kadim lands, his expression unchanged as he continues to analyze the situation. He launches himself away from another ground-shattering impact from the mace. Using his superior speed and agility, he easily outmaneuvers the lumbering beast. He comes to a sudden stop, kicking up dust as he prepares his next move. Frustrated by his evasiveness, the demon insults him, saying, "Rat is a more fitting name than wild dog." However, Kadim simply glances back toward the castle gates, a subtle hint at his true strategy. The demon notices his glances and mistakenly believes he's planning to flee to the castle for safety, calling the idea futile. Meanwhile, high on the castle walls, Duncan ascends the stairs, putting Kadim's secret plan into motion. Back on the battlefield, the beast taunts Kadim, stating that it's true, a human body can never stand against a demon, and continues his verbal jab, saying that to kill him, he should have brought Elga's hounds, the elite forces of the Holy Knights. At this, our guy concedes, "That's right, in my current state, it would be difficult to smash the demon's muscle puppet." The demon laughs maniacally, believing Kadim has finally admitted defeat and calling him foolish. But with a sharp glint in his eye, Kadim changes the subject, asking about its true body. The demon is caught completely off guard by the question, unsure of what he's implying. Just then, on the castle ramparts, a panicked Duncan calls out to Kadim, his part of the plan seemingly complete. Kadim points out that if it's the demon's true body, then even a weak traveling merchant could handle it, and he finishes his taunt, asking if the demon agrees that its real form could be taken out quite easily. The demon's eyes widen in horrified realization as the meaning of his words sinks in. And worried, he says, "Could it be?" while glancing at the castle ramparts. Just then, blood drips onto the castle wall. The demon's true form, a small, fleshy, multi-eyed creature, is revealed, impaled by a dagger on the castle wall. The demon roars in agony and fury, screaming, You bastard." Kadim simply looks on with a cold, satisfied smile, his brilliant and ruthless plan having succeeded. Just then, a flashback reveals Kadim's deduction. Baron Molden isn't hiding a treasure, he is hiding a demon. At this, Duncan is utterly shocked by the revelation, exclaiming in disbelief while our hero stands coolly behind him. The merchant voices his confusion, as he was certain the Baron was just hiding some treasure in the basement. However, Kadim explains that an honorable man like the Baron would only refuse a request so vehemently if he were hiding something truly shameful. With the deduction made, the two of them stand before the heavy, ornate doors leading to the castle basement. Duncan observes that the door is secured with a ridiculously large and sturdy-looking padlock, making entry seem all but impossible. But Kadim simply states, "Not anymore," as he flexes his muscles, preparing to brute force his way through. With a single, powerful pull, he shatters the massive lock, demonstrating his overwhelming strength. He then hands a dagger to Duncan, instructing him to sneak into the basement once the moon wanes and stab the demon's true form, a mere lump of flesh. Terrified, Duncan questions the plan, reminding him that they're dealing with a powerful demon. Kadim confidently reassures Duncan, promising that the demon will be so focused on fighting him that its defenseless true form will be an easy target after that. He gives his final, critical instruction, "Do not miss that moment." The scene flashes back to that very moment, as blood drips from the demon's main body. Duncan's dagger is plunged deep into the creature's true form, successfully completing his vital mission. Miles away, the possessed Viscount's hand reaches out as if in pain. The demon screams in agony, realizing its malice is no longer reaching its main body. As the connection is severed, it lets out a frustrated growl. In a fit of pure rage, he screams, "You bastard." However, Kadim looks up toward the castle walls and calmly says, "Well done, traveling merchant." The demon, now aware of its impending doom, vows to give him the most agonizing death imaginable. It continues its threats, promising to tear his limbs off and shove his guts down his own throat. Watching from the castle walls, Duncan is horrified to see the monstrous creature grow even larger in its rage. Our guy internally realizes that even with its true form dead, the malice possessing the vessel must be destroyed to finish the job. Just then, the enraged beast attacks, raising its massive mace. Our guy dodges the attack by sidestepping, and for the counterattack he swings his own axe. However, when his axe strikes the demon's body, it breaks and shatters into pieces. The demon scoffs at the pathetic weapon and calls our guy foolish, asking if he really believed it could even leave a scratch. And he again swings his massive mace. However, our guy deflects it with his sword. But the force of the blow sends our guy skidding backward. Our guy then notices his broken axe. The furious demon declares it will slaughter every last one of the Molden runts until its host body falls apart. It then mockingly tells him that he won't live to see it, because he's going to die right here, right now. Kadim ignores the threat and shouts up to the castle walls, "Traveling merchant." The demon is momentarily confused by his seemingly random shout. From atop the castle walls, Duncan answers the call, shouting, "Yes, sir," and announces that he's brought the item Kadim asked for, the dwarven throwing axe. With a powerful heave, he throws the legendary axe from the battlements, sending it flying toward the battlefield. The glowing axe soars through the air, heading straight for him. But Duncan panics, realizing his own strength is far too weak to throw the axe the full distance. Kadim, however, confidently tells the merchant not to worry, for a true dwarven masterpiece has a will of its own. And as if hearing his words, the axe pulses with energy, proving it's no ordinary weapon. The axe accelerates mid-flight, speeding toward its intended target. Kadim reaches out and catches the axe. Gripping the axe tightly, our guy is now ready for the final fight. Duncan stares in disbelief, having just witnessed the axe fly over 60 meters on its own in an instant. The demon is also shocked. How could that be? Our guy states that the Baron really is something else. He should have just kept the demon hidden. He then admires the fine craftsmanship of the dwarven axe now firmly in his grasp. The demon recognizes the weapon as a creation of the northern dwarves and realizes that Kadim came to Molden just for this axe. Kadim slams the blunt end of the axe into the ground, preparing to unleash its power. He dismissively tells the demon it talks too much for a possession type. Our guy prepares to throw, declaring it's time to shut the demon's mouth for good. With a powerful spin, he launches the glowing dwarven axe at his foe. The beast screams, "It's a dwarf weapon, or whatever," and he swings his massive mace with all his might, aiming to shatter the dwarven axe. The spinning axe and the heavy mace are on a collision course. The dwarven axe meets the demon's crude mace in a cataclysmic impact and shatters it into pieces. The demon is utterly shocked as its solid steel mace is shattered to pieces by the powerful axe. Yet the axe continues its trajectory unabated, slicing clean through the demon's head. The demon's monstrous body begins to crumble and decay, its life force extinguished. Kadim grins, satisfied that he has finally acquired a good weapon. Descending from the castle walls by a string, Duncan lets out a sigh of awe and relief. The possessed vessel of Viscount Adlin finally collapses, defeated. A cloud of black and red malice erupts from the corpse as the demon's influence fades. Kadim observes the dissipating malice, explaining that without the main body, possessed puppets cannot be sustained. With the main threat neutralized, he realizes there's just one loose end left to tie up. He turns to find Baron Molden approaching him from behind. Duncan, seeing the Baron, calls out in surprise and confusion. The Baron draws his sword, his movements unnaturally stiff, and attacks our guy. Just in time, our guy sidesteps and dodges the attack. A tense silence falls over the battlefield as Kadim and the Baron lock eyes. Kadim stares grimly, calling out the Baron's name. A dark, demonic aura begins to swirl around the Baron's body. His eyes glow a menacing red as he asks if Kadim thought the fight was over. Now fully possessed by the demon's lingering malice, he sneers, "You shameless wild dog?" Kadim's expression hardens as he realizes he must now fight the very man he just saved. Unfazed, Kadim confirms his suspicions, realizing the demon had already planted its malice within the Baron as a contingency plan. Demon tells him that he grant the Baron false hope through self-sacrifice, only to then force him to witness his own people slaughter. The demon seethes, lamenting that it was just one step away from savoring the Baron's ultimate despair before Kadim ruined everything. Kadim deduces that the malice was specifically designed to keep the Baron alive just long enough to witness the destruction of his beloved home. Trying to provoke him, the demon asks if he will tear the Baron apart just as he did with Viscount Adlin. But Kadim merely scoffs at its confidence, coolly asking if it really thinks it can pull that off. Correcting the demon's assumptions, he tells the malevolent spirit that it is mistaken about something crucial. He then clarifies that his actions were never for the Baron's sake. He simply made a pragmatic deal and reveals the cold strategic reason he brought the Baron into battle, to use him as a pawn in this exact scenario. The demon attempts a bluff, pointing out that the soldiers are watching and will hunt him down if he kills their leader. Kadim counters logically, stating that they would do the same if the demon survived by taking over the Baron's body. With chilling resolve, he declares that if Molden attacks him, he won't hesitate to slaughter every last one of the soldiers. Having witnessed his power, the demon grimaces, acknowledging that the barbarian's threat to massacre everyone is no bluff. Accepting this, he cackles maniacally, declaring that for its plan to work, the Baron must die at Kadim's hands. As a mere fragment, it explains that even if it can't destroy Molden itself, it can still achieve its ultimate goal, to savor the Baron's agony. The possessed Baron then lunges forward, screaming that he'll force the man to watch his own soldiers die by the barbarian's hand. And yet, Kadim remains completely still, unimpressed by the desperate and pathetic attack. However, the demon stops midway. Kadim watches intently, sensing a change in the struggle for control. Indeed, the Baron's body convulses as he groans in pain, fighting the demonic influence from within. With trembling hands, the Baron's true will begins to fight back, his own grip tightening on his weapon. He grunts and struggles as a fierce internal battle rages for control of his body. Then, in a stunning display of willpower, Baron Molden's own consciousness resurfaces, screaming that the demon will not harm his people. The demon is utterly shocked, unable to comprehend how a mere mortal could possibly resist its possession. Kadim watches the impossible feat, confirming that the Baron's spirit is as strong as he had hoped. With a final roar of defiance, the Baron shouts that he's taking the demon to hell with him. As he tries to sacrifice his life, his sword shatters against his armor. However, he did not stop and increase the pressure. In a final, desperate act of self-sacrifice, he stabs his own body. A pool of dark blood spreads across the ground as the fatally wounded Baron begins to collapse. From the castle ramparts, his loyal soldiers witness the horrifying event in stunned silence. They cry out in confused anguish, unable to understand why their beloved leader would take his own life. The Baron falls heavily to the ground, his final act of defiance complete. The fading voice of the demon expresses its utter disbelief that a human could overcome its possession just to commit suicide. Now free of the demon, Baron Molden regains consciousness. Kadim approaches the fallen noble, his expression unreadable. Duncan rushes to his side, nervously asking if the Baron is dead. At this, Kadim quietly informs the merchant that the Baron is not yet dead, though the wound is fatal. As the Baron coughs up blood, Kadim remarks on the impressive strength it must have taken to pierce such thick armor. The dying Baron admits that such a feat would have been impossible without borrowing the demon's power. With regret in his voice, he laments that even in this final moment, he has failed once again. Kadim looks down at the dying man, a flicker of something other than his usual coldness in his eyes. In a gesture of unexpected respect, Kadim takes his enchanted sword, Mosquito, and places it in the Baron's hand. Confused, the Baron notices his body feels slightly lighter as the sword's magic takes effect. Just then, Kadim explains that the sword's vampirism effect will only delay his death for a short while, but it will give him time. However, he acknowledges that while most people's will shatters when facing a demon, leaving only fear, the Baron was different, choosing mutual destruction rather than surrendering his spirit. He then tells the Baron not to blame himself, stating that this is a tribute to his incredible iron will. Duncan can only stare in stunned silence at this uncharacteristic display of compassion. The merchant is shocked. He had believed Kadim saw humans as nothing more than walking lumps of meat, yet here he was, showing profound respect. Kadim tells the Baron that while he cannot save him, he can at least grant him an honorable death by listening to his last words, and offers the dying noble a chance to speak his mind one last time, without regrets. Barely able to speak, the Baron manages a weak laugh, calling it an honor. He expresses his gratitude that such a great warrior is with him at the very end. Beginning his confession, he admits his final thoughts are filled with nothing but complaints and regrets. His greatest regret, he explains, was not destroying the demon the moment he discovered it. In a flashback, the grotesque, rock-like demon is seen tempting a younger Baron, promising to make Molden the greatest territory in the region, and recalls the demon's only condition, that he must cherish his people and devote himself to the land as if they were his own children. Thinking the condition strange but harmless, he accepted the pact, unknowingly stepping into the demon's fatal trap. Both kept their promises, Molden prospered under the demon's power, and the Baron worked tirelessly for his people. However, he confesses that over time, his feigned love for his people became genuine and profound. But as his love grew, so did his guilt and anxiety, knowing that this prosperity was built on a demonic lie. He lived in constant, gnawing fear that the demon could take it all away on a whim. Eventually, his worst fears were realized when Viscount Adlin, manipulated by the demon, arrived to destroy everything he held dear. Kadim finally understands the demon's truly twisted goal, to make the Baron genuinely love his people, only to savor his despair upon losing it all. The Baron then laments that even in victory he had to rely on someone else's strength to save his home. But Kadim corrects him, pointing out that it was the Baron's own powerful will that ultimately drove out the demon's malice. Finding some peace in his words, the Baron agrees that at least he was able to end it with his own strength. Kadim looks down and quietly affirms the dying man's final act of courage. With his last breaths, the Baron asks him to deliver a message to someone named Delpina. He also mentions a tulip, and struggles to say that he failed to protect them. His final, heartbreaking message is a simple apology to those he couldn't save. Baron Molden, the noble lord who sacrificed everything, finally passes away. Kadim gazes at the fallen Baron, his expression a mixture of grim respect and stoic resolve. In the aftermath of the battle, a solemn funeral procession for Baron Molden begins at the castle. As the late Baron's body is carried to the courtyard, he is mourned by his people. Baroness Molden, now the acting lord, watches over the proceedings with a heavy heart. All his loyal soldiers are also desperate. Even the common folk gather to mourn the loss of their Baron who sacrificed himself for their sake. Observing from a distance, Kadim and Duncan watch the funeral get underway. Meanwhile, soldiers gather around the grotesque remains of the demon that was once Viscount Adlin. Captain Delton quietly contemplates the confusing and bloody events of the previous night. A soldier reports that their fallen comrades have been attended to, and all that remains is to burn the monster's corpse. He adds, anyway, what exactly happened here? To think that the monster fighting the barbarian was Viscount Alden. After that, he expresses his disbelief at how Adlin's entire emaciated army perished overnight. However, he's puzzled by the Baron's suicide, and wonders if a demon was truly responsible for the tragedy, and concludes that only the barbarian, Kadim, knows the full truth, but he is keeping his mouth shut. As Delton tries to make sense of it all, he recalls Kadim appearing with the Baron's body and the soldiers demanding answers. The barbarian had delivered a simple, edited truth. The Baron fought his enemy until his final breath, and that is all they needed to know. The soldiers silently absorbed his stark yet honorable account of their lord's last moments. With his story told, Kadim had ordered the gates opened, and told them that the Baron was a true man who deserved to rest among the treasure he loved most, his people. Delton's expression shifts as he begins to grasp the deeper meaning behind the barbarian's words. He realizes Kadim's story positions the Baron not as a demon contractor, but as a hero who died fighting for Molden. Inspired, he vows that he and his men will carry on the Baron's will and protect their home. It dawns on him that the Baron's most precious treasure was never gold, but the people he swore to protect. Just then he rallies his men to clean up the aftermath, declaring it their first duty under their new lord, the Baroness. His soldiers roar in agreement, united in their new purpose. As Kadim and Duncan prepare to leave, the Baroness arrives to speak with them. Now the new lord of Molden, she formally thanks the mercenary for his invaluable aid against their enemy. On behalf of her late husband and all of Molden, she bows deeply in gratitude. Kadim, ever blunt, states that there is no need for any further thanks. He pats the dwarven axe at his hip, declaring that he has already received his payment from the Baron. The Baroness is taken aback by his cold and transactional response. Insisting that a single weapon is not enough, she offers what meager reward of gold and food she can. However, Kadim curtly refuses, telling her to put it away. Instead, he gives them the location of a bandit base he cleared out, which is filled with supplies. He instructs her to retrieve the supplies for the people of Molden, assuring her the bandits are gone for good. Overwhelmed by his unexpected generosity, the Baroness bows once more, vowing to never forget the favor, and states from now on, your benefactors are Molden's benefactors, and your enemies are Molden's enemies. She then extends an open invitation asking him to visit Molden again should he ever have the chance. She promises that upon his return, he will be welcomed with the utmost respect. Kadim remains non-committal, saying he can't make any promises before turning to leave with Duncan. Just as he's about to depart, he turns and asks if her name is Delpina. Shocked that a stranger knows her name, she demands to know how. Kadim reveals that her late husband, the Baron, left the final message for her. He relays the Baron's dying words, an apology to his Tulip for being unable to protect her. The name Tulip triggers a precious memory, revealing it was her husband's secret term of endearment for her. A single tear escapes as the weight of her husband's final, loving message settles in. Kadim concludes that her husband died an honorable man, not as a demon's puppet, but as the true Lord of Molden. Telling her she can be proud of him, Kadim and Duncan finally take their leave. Now on the road, Duncan excitedly recounts his terrifying mission to retrieve the axe from the demon's lair. Kadim quickly grows tired of the merchant's rambling and tells him, "That's enough." With a glare, he repeats his command, forcefully shutting the man up. A terrified Duncan can only whimper in agreement. With his companion finally quiet, Kadim asks if he brought the item he requested. At this, Duncan nervously hands over a water skin filled with demon blood. Kadim inspects the blood from the possession-tied demon, knowing it likely grants buffs against mental attacks. He grimly notes, however, that it will be useless against his ultimate affliction, the madness debuff. He resolves to find a cure for his madness after he finally reunites with Melissa at the Mage Tower. Holding up his new dwarven throwing axe, he acknowledges that the powerful weapon should at least lessen his reliance on demon blood. He then marvels at the axe, an ancient treasure of a quality he never encountered, even in the original game. He speculates that it must be an artifact from the Age of Myth, when humans, elves, and dwarves battled for supremacy. If it's truly a relic from the ancient dwarf kingdom, he concludes it has to be at least a unique tier weapon. Still, he can't help but wonder why such a priceless treasure was hidden in the basement with a demon. Putting the pieces together, Kadim asks if Duncan saw anything unusual while retrieving the weapon. A terrified Duncan stammers that he vaguely remembers seeing a faint white symbol on the treasure chest. The mention of a symbol concerns Kadim, but he knows he can't risk returning to Molden just to investigate, because he knows he's left a long, bloody trail across the land to get this far. He then anticipates that his pursuers, almost certainly the Holy Knights of Elga, will find him soon enough. While he's unconcerned with low-ranking paladins, he knows the high-ranking Knights of the Order pose a serious threat. From his past life, he recalls the most formidable of them all, the Arch-Paladin. A bitter smirk forms on Kadim's face at the memory of the powerful fanatic. He remarks aloud that the thought of the Holy Knights brings back some bitter memories. He curses under his breath, expressing his contempt for those damn fanatics. As if summoned by his thoughts, the scene shifts to Lady Helia, riding hard towards Molden. She turns and berates her subordinate Edon for being too slow in making her wait. A winded Eden struggles to catch his breath and apologizes, earning only a look of disdain from her. After that, Lady Hylia points towards the fortress in the distance, announcing their imminent arrival at Molden. As Kadim unconsciously quickens his pace, a winded Duncan calls out, warning him that he's heading the wrong way, and frantically explains that at this speed, they'll run right into a border guard post, a situation they desperately need to avoid. Pointing towards a less traveled path, he suggests they turn back and take the safer, more discreet side route. Kadim pauses, realizing he had indeed been unconsciously rushing ahead. He reflects that the anxiety of being pursued by holy knights, combined with resurfacing old memories, had made him impatient without him even realizing it. Acknowledging Duncan's sound advice, he simply says, "Got it," and agrees to follow his lead. As they travel, Duncan's mind wanders, replaying recent memories of the siege and his new companion. So he hesitantly tries to start a conversation, cautiously addressing his intimidating travel partner. However, a single sharp glance from Kadim is enough to terrify the merchant into silence. Flustered and scared, he quickly backtracks, stammering that it was nothing and to never mind. Unbothered, Kadim pulls out his newly acquired dwarven throwing axe, ignoring Duncan completely. He gives the axe a test swing, muttering about what a dull companion he's stuck with, while Duncan watches on nervously. After a moment of quiet contemplation, the merchant remains silent, having clearly learned his lesson. Elsewhere, the Holy Knights are closing in, with Lady Hylia galloping at full speed toward their destination. She masterfully brings her powerful steed to a sudden halt, a look of impatience on her face. She then lets out an exasperated sigh, clearly annoyed by the slow progress of their pursuit. Her subordinate, Eden, finally catches up, his own horse panting heavily from the strain of the chase. Just then, she admits that they aren't making any real progress in their hunt for the fiend, and asks why he can't keep a faster pace. Eden protests that it's impossible to go any faster on a normal horse, muttering under his breath about her advantage in riding a special, radiant horse. He mentally laments that he's up against a divine steed, a rare mount granted exclusively to arch-paladins that can run for hundreds of miles without tiring, and bitterly thinks that Hylia's own capabilities must be lacking if the horse isn't moving even faster, but keeping up is still nearly impossible. Suggesting a new course of action, he asks if they should stop at Molden to gather information and verify rumors about the Baron. But Hylia shuts him down, explaining that the Imperial family has warned the Order not to interfere in that territory, and their top priority is hunting down their target. With a stern glare, she forcefully reminds him not to dare forget his duty. Internally, Eden scoffs at the concept of duty, questioning if shattering holy relics and slaughtering innocents are truly the missions of a holy knight. Deciding their current strategy is ineffective, she declares, this isn't going to work. She tells Eden that at this slow pace, their target will cross the border into Alliance territory, so she will ride ahead to chase him down first. She then orders him to follow behind and carefully check the path to make sure they haven't missed any tracks. Spurring her horse, she gallops off, ignoring his weak protest for her not to just leave him behind. Eden is left in a cloud of dust, watching the glowing trail of the radiant horse disappear into the distance. Alone and seething with resentment, he lets out a furious, silent scream of frustration at his commander. Panting with rage, he is left to continue the pursuit at his own pace. However, he quickly composes himself, blaming his agitation for the outburst and asking his god Elga for forgiveness. Yet his piety quickly turns to resentment as he questions why Elga would grant such mighty power and blessings to someone as flawed as Hylia instead of a truly faithful believer. Catching himself having profane thoughts again, he sighs and resigns himself to the idea that everything is simply Elga's will. He consoles himself with dogma, reasoning that the will of a god is too profound for a mere human to attempt to fathom. Suddenly, he spots something on the path that brings him to an abrupt halt. Dismounting, he identifies the huge footprints as belonging to the fiend they've been chasing. However, he notes with suspicion that the tracks turn at a crossroads, an uncharacteristically careless move for a target who has been meticulously erasing his trail. Despite his misgivings, he follows the conspicuous tracks down a narrow path leading into a dense forest. His suspicion grows as he notices unnaturally scattered branches and vines along the trail. Upon closer inspection, he sees that the branches have uniform, sharply cut surfaces, confirming his fears. The knight stops. He ties his horse to a tree. Drawing his sword and shield, Eden prepares for the inevitable confrontation. The Holy Knight proceeds with caution, now fully aware that his quarry is nearby and waiting for him. He realizes he has been led much deeper into a vast forest he doesn't recognize. Frustrated, he wonders how the fiend knew about this hidden side path, giving him a clear tactical advantage. Suddenly, a voice calls out from a nearby thicket, "Sir, it's this way," and his attention snaps towards the sound. He spots Duncan in the overgrown brush, who explains that the path is blocked, so they must go a different way. Then, from the bushes, Kadim emerges. Eden gasps in a mix of fear and triumph, realizing he's finally found his target. The knight is struck by the memory from the holy relic, which showed a blood-soaked, demonic-looking barbarian. Confirming the man's identity, Eden steels himself, recognizing the warrior powerful enough to shatter the sacred artifact. A wave of doubt washes over him as he questions whether he can possibly subdue such a monstrous being by himself. Deciding against a direct confrontation, he reasons that he's done his part just by locating the fiend, and that the success-crazed arch-paladin can handle the rest. Content with his decision to retreat, he thinks the agonizing game of hide-and-seek is finally over, and all he needs to do is report back to Lady Helia. However, as he quietly turns to leave, the snap of a twig underfoot alerts Kadim to his presence. Eden curses his clumsiness, hoping against hope that the barbarian couldn't have heard such a small sound from that distance. But with inhuman speed and precision, Kadim turns and hurls his dwarven axe directly at the hidden knight. The axe flies through the air with terrifying speed, giving Eden barely a moment to react. The dwarven weapon, imbued with immense power, closes the distance in an instant. He just barely manages to raise his shield to block the incoming projectile. But the axe smashes into the shield with overwhelming force, embedding itself deep within the blessed metal. The Holy Knight stares in utter disbelief, horrified that his sacred, blessed weapon was shattered in a single strike. Stunned and defenseless, he looks up from his broken shield just in time to see his attacker closing in. Having retrieved his sword, Kadim leaps from the trees, descending upon the shocked knight to press his advantage. A glint of fury shines in his eye as he prepares to strike down the Holy Knight. He roars internally, fed up with having to deal with another one of the Elga Fate's fucking fanatic bastards. The battle begins as Kadim charges the armored Holy Knight, Eden, and unleashes a powerful downward swing with his sword. The knight is shocked by the sudden, fast attack. Kadim thinks he will aim for the gap in the helmet, but he fails. His sword strikes the knight's helmet, and the knight collapses to the ground due to the impact of the blow. After that, he takes his axe from the Holy Knight's shield. He then launches a kick that connects squarely with the shield, sending a shockwave through his defense. The force of the blow sends the Holy Knight staggering backward, knocking him to the ground. Stunned, Eden struggles to recover from the brutal assault. Seizing the opportunity and realizing the shield's holy consecration has faded, Kadim raises his new dwarven axe for a finishing blow. The knight watches in horror as the barbarian prepares to strike him down. With a grunt of exertion, he quickly discards his now useless shield. Just as he does, Kadim brings the axe down with incredible force. The weapon smashes into the discarded shield, utterly shattering it on impact. Eden is left in disbelief, shocked by his opponent's monstrous strength and the sheer power of the weapon. Looking at the axe buried in his destroyed shield, he realizes he would be dead if he hadn't dodged. Kadim confirms the knight isn't on a normal patrol and asks if he was tracked here. Terrified, Eden remains silent, unable to answer. Retrieving his axe, Kadim notes that the knight appears to be alone. With a menacing look, he declares that since Eden is by himself, it won't be hard to silence him for good. Fear grips the knight as he understands the barbarian's lethal intent. In a desperate move, he raises his sword, preparing to fight back. Kadim watches impassively, unimpressed by this act of defiance. The knight begins to pray, calling upon Elga to grant him the power of the sacred guide of light, and asking for the strength to stand against the wicked fiends before him. But before the spell can be completed, Kadim hurls his dwarven axe with blinding speed. However, Eden barely manages to dodge it. After passing him, the axe smashes into a tree. Kadim mockingly asks if he thought he'd be allowed to cast his spell peacefully, then orders a startled Duncan to retrieve his axe. The knight realizes with frustration that the attack stopped him from receiving the blessing he was trying to cast. Before he can recover, Kadim has already closed the distance between them. Eden is stunned by the barbarian's speed, realizing his opponent is on him in an instant. Their swords clash in a shower of sparks. The knight is staggered by the raw strength of the blow, thinking that if it had connected with his helmet, he would have been knocked out instantly. Kadim presses his advantage, relentlessly swinging his sword. The flurry of attacks forces Eden onto the defensive. His sword finds a gap in the knight's defense, striking his shoulder pauldron. Eden is floored by his opponent's tactical prowess, realizing the man isn't just mindlessly strong but also a highly experienced fighter. Kadim continues his furious assault, overwhelming him. The knight feels his joints snapping with every block, barely able to withstand the brutal onslaught, and struggles to predict his opponent's erratic sword path, feeling completely outmatched. As he fights for his life, he concludes that it feels like he's fighting a monster disguised as a human. Finally, Kadim breaks through his guard, their blades locking. Seizing the opening, our protagonist prepares to grab the knight's wrist. With his sword arm caught, Eden is left completely vulnerable. Now Kadim swings his sword with a precise strike, and brutally stabs the knight through a weak point in his plate armor. Eden chokes in agony as the blade pierces his side. When Kadim retrieves his sword, blood bursts from the knight's body, and he screams in agony. The severed arm and sword fall uselessly to the ground. Gasping for breath, the horribly maimed knight clutches his bloody stump. Kadim coldly judges the man's skills, remarking that he's even worse than the first spearman kid he fought. The knight grits his teeth, acknowledging that with his right arm gone, he can no longer fight. In a last-ditch effort, he reaches for his fallen sword with his remaining hand. He then throws the sword at Kadim, using it as a diversion. While Kadim is momentarily distracted by the thrown weapon, the knight turns and flees. Just then, Duncan arrives with the dwarven axe only to find the battle over and the enemy fleeing. Our guy takes his dwarven axe from him, and he stares toward the fleeing knight.